Welcome to another stream. Boy, that looked strange. I fix now. Let me go ahead and get all my ducks in a row here. Including, I got to get the actual stream mounted up for YouTube and get the word out with the URL for YouTube because it changes every time. But welcome to another stream. We are going to be reading The Return of the King today. There, I have the YouTube chat up now. Including, I got to get the actual stream. Mute myself so I don't hear myself. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome to another stream. Let me go ahead and get the word out now that I have the YouTube URL. Oh, right, there we go. Let's get the word out. I suppose I don't have to have that as a multi-stream. I can just have that as Twitch, right? I don't know. I like having redundancies. Just in case something goes wrong, there's redundant systems in place to fix. All right. And we'll post on Twitter. I feel like that's... I feel like Twitter is useless. What did that say? Whatever. Okay, so welcome to the stream. We are going to be, today we're going to be reading, of course, The Return of the King, which I have right here, which of course is at least partially keyed out because of the green design of the ring there. Actually really cool. Also, words, The Return of the King are like that, so, you know, it just looks like Bag End shining through. Shining Through. That was a movie, wasn't it? I seem to remember it was a bad movie. I never saw it, though. But I think it did pretty poorly. Should look into that. All right, let's see. I have water? I have more than enough water. Okay, cool. Why is the bitrate thing just hovering there? That's so weird. It's so it's not green. It's not red. It's not yellow. It's just white, and it's not a line. Oh, now it's red. It's worse. Oh well, I'm not gonna get myself in a tither about it. I mean, I got enough on my mind here. So I believe, yeah, Pyre of Denethor, because we've read Battle of Pelennor Fields, which of course is a very, very exciting time there. We have the Pyre of Denethor, which is not a very long chapter. We'll probably get through 2 chapters, I think. The Pyre of Denethor is very short. Page 832 to 840. So that's 8 pages. That's real small. And then we have the Houses of the Healing. That's at least a little longer. The last debate is a pretty... It's not a chunky one, but there's a lot to talk about there. But yeah, the chapters start getting really short. Blackgate opens real short, and that's the end of book 6. And it's just interesting because there's some really long chapters like Flight to the Ford and like the Council of Elrond, and now they've gotten very short. Hey, Wasted Quake Ranger, how are you doing today? There is a there is a chance that today just might be a shorter stream. I might just get through those 2 chapters, and then regardless of what time it is, I might decide to just stop there. And the reason is because I am dealing with sort of an ongoing family emergency. So I'd like to try and not make it too terribly long today. You know, um, it's not like it's a really big bad thing that's happening right this moment, but ever since yesterday, we've been having a lot of things going on over here, so I'm just sort of not in the best headspace today. Not in the greatest headspace, but not in the worst either. So there is that. That's very important to note. But how are you doing, Wasted Quake Ranger, and anybody else who may happen to be watching? I hope you're having an excellent day. One thing that I like to say to people when I'm feeling a bit put upon is I hope you have the day that you deserve, which often comes off in the sort of negative sense that I feel like a person probably doesn't deserve to have a very good day, and I'm hoping that they have the day that they deserve. But it's a double-sided thing. It doesn't have to be negative. I hope that everybody does have the day that they deserve, and if they deserve to have a good day, that they're having a good day and such, right? I'm having a mediocre day, we'll say. That's just how it is. But yeah, last time we did this was very exciting because of the chapters that we were in. You know, the Siege of Gondor, very exciting chapter. Ride of Rohirrim, very exciting chapter. Battle of the Pelennor Fields, very exciting chapter. Pyre of Denethor, a little different. Tense. I wouldn't say exciting, but tense. Houses of the Healing, possibly one of the funniest chapters. I just when people ask me, and I do get asked this from time to time, oh, what are the funniest parts of the Lord of the Rings? You know, like, are there any funny parts? That's your last day of work for the week. Oh, so it is your Friday. That is good to hear. Good to hear. Because there's this sort of, let me see if I can explain this better. There's this myth, we'll say. It's definitely a myth that the Lord of the Rings is incredibly serious and is never funny. And that all of the moments that people think of when they think of the Lord of the Rings being funny are from the films. And I will say that to a certain extent, the people who are fans of the book before they are fans of the film exacerbate this issue by pointing out certain things, mostly to do with characters like Merry and Pippin and Gimli, who were relegated is the word I'm looking for, mostly to comic relief in the films. And Merry and Pippin were already pretty funny, but the movie made them sort of goofier. And Gimli definitely was, in the Peter Jackson film, the archetype of the fool from a lot of sort of very early European literature and stage performances and such. I mean, a lot of the Greek plays, a lot of Shakespeare, had the fool, right? And that's the archetype that Peter Jackson seemed to want for Gimli, for example. And Gimli is very different in the book. And I think if you're, I don't relate to this because I read the book so many years before the movie came out, but I understand that there are a lot of people here who, and I don't mean here right now in this chat, but just here in the world that saw the films first and then read the book. And then they're surprised to see how different certain characters are. Gimli's one of them. But I think that they're also may become surprised at how many of those funny moments are in the book, and some of them were not in the movie. And when I think of some of the funniest bits, the Houses of the Healing chapter always comes to my mind because it's a rare moment where we see Aragorn sort of goofing off a little bit. We see Aragorn messing with Merry. We see Aragorn making fun of the doctor there, the herb master that's there. So there's a lot of sort of like, um, it's interesting. Like he's in a kind of a good mood, I think, and that's part of it because they won a big battle and because he's going to be the king soon, and it looks like everything's sort of going well, and especially finding out that Mary's okay and everything was a big part of it. So that's why he probably felt comfortable with messing with him a little bit. And the doctor he was an annoying fellow, so I don't blame Aragorn for sort of making fun of the guy a little bit. But that the Houses of the Healing was not something that was really featured in the film. But there are a lot of moments in the book that like I'll be watching the movie with people who are sort of casual fans. They've never read the book. They like the movies, and I'll mention things that surprise them. And one of them that I mention is the line "potatoes" that Sam does. It's such a big meme, and everybody sort of likes to say it. And that's in the book. Hey kids, how's it going? So, and people are like, that was in the book, really? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, he doesn't say mash 'em, boil 'em, stick 'em in a stew. It's a different line, but he does say it's up to that point. It's exactly the same. He says taters. Gollum asks him what taters are, and then he goes potatoes. That's in there. We already did that part when we read The Two Towers. And people that I tell that to are surprised, like that's in the book. Because I think there is this thought that Tolkien is sort of humorless and not funny, and it's all very serious, and like it's all like reading it is going to be like reading the Bible or something, and it's all going to be very, very serious, and that all of the Tolkien book fans are all very serious people who don't want any jokes because look at how they keep talking about how Gimli shouldn't have been like that in the movie, and they want him to be serious. They want everything to be serious. And the thing is, I can point out like several really funny moments in The Lord of the Rings. It didn't make it into the movie that I really wish had. One of them is from pretty early on. It's right when Frodo and Pippin are about to leave Bag End, and Frodo calls out to Sam because Sam's still in there somewhere. And they mention that Sam was saying goodbye to the beer keg. And then he comes in and he's sort of just like wiping his mouth because he was just, And I like to imagine that, and I said this to Sid once, that if I had been making the movie, I would have shown that. I would have shown him like, Sam, it's time to go. And then just directly cut to Sam's head under the tap. And he's drinking directly from the tap. That's the way that I would have done it. And then Sid said to me, and it would be even funnier if it was like the last few drops coming out there. Hey, Brian, how's it going? How are you today? So there are several really funny comedy moments in The Lord of the Rings that did not make it into the films, which made me wonder why there were moments that they had to inject humor into where it didn't need to be, particularly anything to do with Gimli. He was sort of decided to be the fool. He was decided to be the comedy character. Which, that's certainly a choice. But there were rarely serious moments with Gimli. In the movie, at least, So there's that. Like, I feel like they basically turned him into Ogren, although this was, this was like 2002. It was before Ogren, but But when I think of like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dragon Age, but the first Dragon Age game had this dwarf character named Oghren, who was sort of like movie Gimli. He's really good in battle and all this stuff, but he's sort of like, you know, crude and drunk and just sort of like not necessarily. Well, sometimes he comes off as like a buffoon, but a lot of times it's just that he's sort of a boorish fellow, and that most of his humor comes from the fact that he's unrefined and sort of very rustic character. And I feel like that was like basically Gimli, but it was not book Gimli. It was movie Gimli. Speaking of which, though, I had an interesting moment on Facebook. You guys know me from YouTube. You guys know me from Twitch. You guys know me from Quora. But I do operate in other spheres, and Facebook's one of them because there are a lot of Tolkien related groups on Facebook, and I do look at most of them and sometimes comment on things. And one of the things that came up was the concept of race in Middle Earth, and this was largely born out of some very silly things that Andy Serkis had said. And there were people that were sort of, agreeing with him, and there were some people that were not agreeing with him, and and it was sort of like back and forth. And the one thing that was interesting was that somebody posted a picture of Aragorn from the Ralph Bakshi film, where he looked like I've heard a lot of different things where people compared him to like Buddy Hackett or whatever, but the movie modified Sam's Eves joke. I hadn't been dropping no Eves instead of bag and don't have no Eves. And that's fine. That's that's such a small thing because it's funny both ways. But Aragorn was sort of very almost Native American coded in the 1978 film version of The Lord of the Rings, and and everything about his physical appearance was pretty accurate to the book. They don't really. Tolkien almost never goes into skin color because I don't think he thought it was important. Very rarely will he comment on skin color, but Aragorn, it's mentioned several times, he's kind of dark in a tanned sort of way, and it's just interesting that there's all these different depictions of him, and that people argue over all these different depictions of him, and they really shouldn't, because what really matters is how the character comes off as a person, not what he looks like. And there was one person who replied to the Aragorn image that somebody had posted when they said, well, that wasn't a very good adaptation. And I have to cut it because I will always defend Ralph Bakshi's version. None of the things that were wrong with that movie were his fault. He was basically trying to make The Lord of the Rings with one hand tied behind his back and somebody kicking him in the head the whole time. So difficult to do that. Very difficult to make a movie about anything with one hand tied behind your back and somebody kicking you in the head the whole time. But I had to step in and I said, no, well, yeah, that's just wrong. You don't have to like Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings, but to say that it's not a very good adaptation, I think is just factually incorrect. And I pointed out one thing that this guy did not have a reply to. It is the only good depiction of Galadriel. They have never, in adaptations, got Galadriel right. And I have nothing against the Peter Jackson depiction for the most part. But when she starts yelling and turning into a photo negative and all that stuff, and I was just like, well, he misread this scene. instead of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen. He misread that scene. I said, you want to see the perfect Galadriel? Just watch the Ralph Bakshi film. Watch the animated version. That's what got her completely right. Maybe one day we'll get a live action Galadriel that feels like what she's supposed to. I'm just not holding my breath for it. And I think part of the problem is that Tolkien himself did not really complete the character in the way that he wanted to. Like, she's fully realized in The Lord of the Rings, but when you start thinking about, well, okay, she's 8,000 years old. She's really seen a lot. She's really been through a lot. There is so much history there. And then you find out that when he wrote The Lord of the Rings, he had no idea what her history was. He had no idea where she was from, how she got to be in Middle Earth, or any of that. That all came later because he realized, wow, I wrote a character in The Lord of the Rings that is from the First Age. So I have to figure out a way to put her in the Silmarillion. And he did. She's in there, but she's not like a really important character. She's just mentioned here and there and whatnot. And then we start to get into like the really interesting questions of how did she meet Celeborn? What is she like as a person in the First Age and the Second Age, There's a lot of information about her in The Lord of the Rings. There's more information about her in The Lord of the Rings than there is in the Silmarillion. And that's kind of crazy. Because you would think the Silmarillion would be the place where you would learn all about her. But no, that's not the case. Unfinished Tales has two wildly different and contrasting and incompatible backstories for her. And it'll be really fun to go through those when we get to that point. But right now, we're not at that point. Right now, we're coming over here. And we're going to start reading The Return of the King. So like I said, just a warning that there is a small chance, it depends on sort of where I'm at in my head, that we might end a little early. Just because, like I said, I am in the midst of sort of an ongoing family problem. Yesterday, I would have classified it as a family emergency. Today, it's a bit less severe. But to give you guys the rundown, my grandmother, who is in her 90s, is currently in the hospital. And they didn't know exactly what was wrong with her, other than being in her 90s. So yesterday was sort of a flurry of, ambulances and phone calls back and forth and everybody freaking out. And then, the sigh of relief where it turned out that she was, okay, but, she's still in the hospital. And my mother is also in the hospital today in a completely different matter. She's having a procedure done that had been scheduled for quite a while. It's nothing major, sort of a very minor surgery that she's having that she'll be able to go home the next day. But the reason I bring it up is just the timing of that happening, was not great. And the whole, family, like I said, there's a good chance my phone's going to go off tonight. So, probably, well, I don't know. I don't think I'll get a phone call today because I already did. My mother did call me and let me know that she's in New York City. That's where she's getting this procedure done, and that she got there fine. My sister's with her, so like I said, there's a lot of family things going on right now. Thankfully, it didn't affect the new video that I put up yesterday. Although, let me talk about this just very briefly. So, I went to upload episode 162 last night. This is what happened. This is exactly what happened. I went to upload episode 162. And whenever I upload a video from, YouTube to YouTube, I borrow the details of the previous one and then just edit them. Like I, switch around the description parts that need to be changed. But the title, structure, and everything is the same. The playlist information, And I noticed that episode 161 wasn't showing as a previous episode, and I'm like, that's strange. So I backed out of that, and then I looked at my content screen in YouTube Studio, and I saw that episode 161 was not live. It was not live, and I'm just like, wait a minute. And what it said video could not be processed, which tells me that while it was uploading, there might have been like the internet going down for a brief moment or something, and I didn't notice it. I thought it was uploaded already and that it was scheduled. So, if you're a member of the channel, if you're paying the $5 a month and there is not a new video on Wednesday night, and especially if it's still not there Thursday morning, please let me know. Because normally what I do is around 10 p.m. or so is when I'm uploading the video. It normally takes less than an hour to upload, and then it's supposed to become available to members immediately, and then it's scheduled to be available for the general public like the next week. Hey Boogle, how's it going? But for whatever reason it didn't happen. So if there's not a new video and you're a member and you don't see it there, and I haven't posted anything saying that there won't be one or something, feel free to let me know. Like, grab me. Don't leave a community post. Like, leave a comment or ping me on Discord or whatever you can do, or Quora or whatever, and just be like, hey, is the video there? And that's happened a few times where I've gotten messages from people that said, hey, is the new video up? And I'll be like, oh, it's uploading right now. It'll be available in about 15 minutes or so, like that. But in this case, and I was wondering, like, why am I not getting comments, right? Like views are fine for this week, but I'm not getting new comments because there's no new video. So that was fun. So I made sure they both went up yesterday. Episode 161 directly to everybody. Episode 162 for members first. Let's get into the book. Let's get into the book. We're going to start with, this is chapter 7, actually. The Pyre of Denethor. Here we go. When the dark shadow at the gate withdrew, Gandalf still sat motionless, but Pippin rose to his feet, as if a great weight had been lifted from him. And he stood listening to the horns, and it seemed to him that they would break his heart with joy. Let's talk about that. Okay, so obviously we've gone back a little bit, because when we last left, Gandalf and Pippin was right when the Witch King had appeared, gone through the gates of Minas Tirith. Everybody fled before him, except for Gandalf. And then Gandalf had his sort of confrontation, basically like the Balrog scene, his whole "you shall not pass" sort of thing. Of course, "you shall not pass" is a line from the movie. So you will not, you cannot pass is what he says. But he doesn't say that at the Witch King, but he says some pretty similar stuff. They have their back and forth. And then the horns. Rohan had come at last. One of the best parts of the whole book, right? And then we went to, okay, let's catch up with Merry, right? So we know what happens with Merry. We know Theoden dies. We know the Witch King dies. We know that they win the battle. But now we're going back to that same point, and we're like, okay, well, let's catch up with Gandalf and Pippin, because Pippin is, at this point, trying to get Gandalf to rescue Faramir. Moogle, could you get rid of that guy, please? And Gandalf is about to have sort of a, oh, what do I do? But what's really interesting here is the line, and it seemed to him that they being the horns of Rohan, would break his heart with joy. And this is, Mogul, are you, hold on, let me somebody I got to ban. Let me just get rid of this guy. All right, there we go. He's gone. Okay. And this is exactly what Tolkien was talking about when he came up with the term eucatastrophe. Now, if we look at the term catastrophe, catastrophic, we immediately think of terrible things happening. But traditionally, in classic literature, that's not what catastrophe meant. That's not what a catastrophic event was. Catastrophic didn't mean terrible. Catastrophic meant something major happened that is going to cause a shift in the plot. So basically, a major event is a catastrophe. Anything that's going to change the flow of the entire story is a catastrophe. However, so many times literary catastrophes and theater catastrophes were often terrible events. So the meaning of the word sort of shifted and it became known to be just a bad thing. And we started saying catastrophically bad. Things like that, right? Oh, okay. Well, don't worry, Moogle. I got it. I got rid of the bot. But anyway, Tolkien felt that since the word catastrophic and catastrophe, these words have become entirely negative to people, he really can't use those words in the classic literature sense without confusing people or stopping the plot to explain what he means. And I'm sure he would have had a fight with his editors if he started calling good things catastrophes. So he came up with the idea of eucatastrophe. The U part being from euphoria. And I have a book here. Let me grab it. This one? Yes, it is. This is The Ring of Words, which is a book written by Peter Gilliver, Jeremy Marshall, and Edmund Weiner. It's called The Ring of Words, Tolkien and the Oxford English Dictionary. And this actually has a section that explains in the third part, word studies. If we go to E for eucatastrophe, I'm going to read that entry for you. So first is an excerpt from letter 89. All of a sudden I realized what it was, the very thing I had been trying to write about and explain. For it, I coined the word eucatastrophe, the sudden happy turn in a story which pierces you with a joy that brings tears. In his essay on fairy stories, Tolkien identifies the consolatory happy ending as one of the principal defining features of the fairy story, and coins for this the word eucatastrophe, which he also gives a theological dimension by applying it to the resurrection, the happy ending of the Gospels. Although this word had not yet entered the Oxford English Dictionary, it has been taken up as a technical term by some writers in fantasy literature. As Tolkien explains, it is based on the Greek word catastrophe, overturning, sudden turn, conclusion. The word catastrophe did historically have a neutral sense in English, the change or revolution which produces the conclusion or final event of a dramatic piece. However, its use is now dominated by the negative sense, a conclusion generally unhappy, a disastrous end, finish up, conclusion, upshot, overthrow, ruin, calamitous fate. The notion of a happy catastrophe is so distant from the present understanding of the word that Tolkien felt obliged to invent a new term using the Greek-derived prefix "u", meaning good or well. He could then use the opposite term discatastrophe to refer specifically to a tragic ending. So that's really interesting, obviously. So now, obviously, they talked a lot about endings there. It was all mentioning endings. However, a lot of people believe that a eucatastrophe doesn't necessarily have to happen at the end. And as a matter of fact, even Tolkien's example of the eucatastrophe in The Hobbit was the arrival of the eagles at the Battle of Five Armies. And that doesn't end the story. It ends the Battle of Five Armies. Bilbo still has to go home, discover that he's been declared deceased and that he has to buy all of his stuff back, and there's a whole lot after that. So In that sense, the arrival of the eagles at the Battle of Five Armies is not the ending, but it is a climax. But if you're writing an epic, and The Lord of the Rings is an epic, it's a 1,200-page contiguous novel, you're going to have peaks and valleys. You're going to have several climaxes throughout the story and several instances of catastrophe, whether it's eucatastrophe or discatastrophe. You find it odd that some people say eucatastrophe is unrealistic, but having the worst possible thing happen at the worst possible time isn't, and somehow goes back to being realistic. So it's interesting because what most people are thinking of when they think of that, I'm sorry, your name, Mia West, welcome to the stream, by the way. What's really you're correct, by the way. What's really interesting about that is that when most people hear eucatastrophe, the sudden wonderful thing that happens that brings tears to your eyes, and this is happening in universe to Pippin, which is why I brought this up. Hearing the horns of Rohan, I'll read it a third time, that what he said. And never after in years. I'm skipping a part here. And he stood listening to the horns, and it seemed to him that they would break his heart with joy. And never in after years could he hear a horn blown in the distance without tears starting in his eyes. And I mean, that's just beautiful, right? That's just beautiful. And here's the thing. People are saying, when they say things like that, they're not necessarily wrong, but they are being reductive, because they're conflating the idea of a eucatastrophe with a different literary device known as Deus Ex Machina. Now, Deus Ex Machina is a Latin term. Deus is God. Machina is machine. So what it means literally is God from the machine. Deus Ex Machina. And in literary terms, it refers to any device where a character is in a lot of trouble and then is miraculously saved by something that could only be attributed to divine intervention. And back in the day of early theater, a lot of times they wouldn't know how to get a character out of a bad situation without divine intervention. So they would just write it into their plays and such that God would literally pluck the character out of danger. And in watching this in a play, they would have some sort of simple machine like a winch or a pulley system to physically lift the character up. So it was God as a machine, or God from the machine, Deus Ex Machina. And Tolkien was aware of Deus Ex Machina, and that's why he said the eagles is an example of a Deus Ex Machina that he doesn't want to overuse. That was the big eucatastrophe at the end of The Hobbit. Is it unrealistic? Well, I don't know. Giant birds showing up suddenly. Is that any more unrealistic than Bjorn showing up in his bear form, or there being elves and, orcs and dwarves and a dragon and all this stuff? It's fantasy. It's not meant to be realistic. It's not meant to be realistic. Fantasy is not realistic. It's not meant to be realistic. It should not be realistic. When I talk about realism, what I mean is that it feels like a living, breathing world. It feels like it could be a real place, even though it's not. When a lot of people say what you're quoting, that a eucatastrophe is unrealistic, they're being cynical. They're saying, well, that hasn't happened to me. It hasn't happened to anybody that I know. Wonderful things don't just suddenly happen out of nowhere just when you need them to. And they're ignoring the fact that, yes, sometimes they do. And sometimes really bad things happen at the absolute worst times. Why is one considered to be more realistic than the other? Because our perception of the world is painted by our experiences. And if you've had largely negative experiences, you're going to have a largely negative view of the world. You're going to think everything's meant to be terrible and that we're meant for suffering and everything. So there you have it. Maybe cataphoric, I think even catastrophic, was used in the Bible to describe something angelic. I mean, it as a word, it's pretty old. you know. But what I'm getting at here, though, is that the comment that was made was absolutely correct. That a eucatastrophe is no more realistic than a regular catastrophe. But the thing is that we've been unfortunately inundated with low fantasy. And the thing about low fantasy is it's meant to be a little bit more like the real world. And there's nothing wrong with low fantasy, but it's not the genre that we're currently reading. The Return of the King is high fantasy. And it's a fairy story, essentially. It's an epic fairy story. And so it's not meant to be realistic in the sense that these things would happen in these situations. You know, there are many, many examples of Deus Ex Machina. There are many, many examples of divine intervention. There are eucatastrophes. There are generally terrible catastrophes. There are terrible events that lead to good things. There are good things that lead to bad things. You know, it's sort of chaotic in that sense. So I think really, yeah, it is odd that people do that when you're looking at it in a vacuum, but you have to sort of consider like what their life experience is. They think it's unrealistic because it hasn't happened to them. They haven't had that sudden happy turn. And that's a shame. But we're reading fantasy literature. And one of these days, I'm going to read to you guys Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, which is called On Fairy Stories. And he's going to explain why we read these sort of things, why we enjoy reading them. And a big part of it is escape. We're escaping the real world by enjoying, you know, sort of dipping our toes into something that's not real, something that's fantastical, something that is maybe a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Idealized, perhaps. And, you know, what happened, you know, I mean, everybody says, well, you know, happy endings are not realistic. That's not true, really. It's not true. It's just that you haven't had a happy ending. You haven't had an ending. You're still around, right? And when we think about the end of this, yeah, there's a lot of characters that have really happy endings. And then there's Frodo. At one point, Aragorn cursed his own catastrophic choices. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. That was towards the end of The Fellowship of the Ring, where he was getting a little bit full of despair. And he felt like every choice that he made was a bad one, and that maybe he can't trust himself to make choices for other people. And that's who hasn't been there, right? Who hasn't been there? Have you ever like thought like maybe I shouldn't be the one to guide people if I'm always wrong? Let's continue along. We barely got a paragraph in, but we had a lot to talk about there. But now suddenly his errand returned to his memory, and he ran forward. At that moment Gandalf stirred and spoke to Shadowfax and was about to ride through the gate. "Gandalf, Gandalf!" cried Pippin, and Shadowfax halted. "What are you doing here?" said Gandalf. "Is it not a law in this city that those who wear the black and silver must stay in the citadel unless their lord gives them leave?" "He has," said Pippin. "He sent me away, but I am frightened. Something terrible may happen up there. The lord is out of his mind, I think. I am afraid he will kill himself and kill Faramir too. Can't you do something?" Gandalf looked through the gaping gate, and already on the fields he heard the gathering sound of battle. He clenched his hand. "I must go," he said. "The Black Rider is abroad, and he will yet bring ruin on us. I have no time." "But Faramir!" cried Pippin. "He is not dead, and they will burn him alive if someone does not stop him." "Burn him alive," said Gandalf. "What is this tale? Be quick." "Denethor has gone to the tomb," said Pippin, "and he has taken Faramir, and he says they are all to burn, and he will not wait. And they are to make a pyre and burn him on it, and Faramir as well, and he has sent men to fetch wood and oil. And I have told Baragon, but I'm afraid he won't dare to leave his post. He is on guard." "But what could he do anyway?" So Pippin poured out his tale, reaching up and touching Gandalf's knee with trembling hands. "Can't you save Faramir?" "Maybe I can," said Gandalf. "But if I do, then others will die, I fear. Well, I must come, since no other help can reach him. But evil and sorrow will come of this. Even in the heart of our stronghold, the enemy has power to strike us, for his will, it is at work." So Gandalf said something really important here, is he's being essentially begged by Pippin to save Faramir. Now, The Lord of the Rings is not an allegory, we know this, but it is a Catholic work. And a lot of people misunderstand what that means. They have their own ideas of what that means, and they're wrong. But this is an example of The Lord of the Rings being a Catholic work, because what we're seeing here is Pippin praying to an angel. And that is the essence of what Catholicism is in terms of how prayers work, is that a lot of times you would not pray directly to God, you would go through proxies such as saints and angels. And Gandalf, who is an angel, is being asked a prayer, essentially. And he has to make a decision. He can answer this prayer and save Faramir at the expense of, well, he doesn't know who. It turns out to be Theoden. Or he could say, no, I have to go out and I have to fight the Witch King. And if he had done that, Merry would not have become so injured. Eowyn would not have become so injured. Theoden might have lived. But Faramir would have died. And that would have left Minas Tirith in a terrible state. You know, so... And Gandalf has to feel this. There's a moment that comes a little bit later when he knows what's happened, where he really feels the weight of the decision that he made to answer this prayer and to save Faramir because he was asked to, because he's got such a soft spot for hobbits, because he's got such a soft spot for Pippin, and he knows that he can't save everybody. He can't save everybody. And he made the right choice. And the reason that we know that he made the right choice is because Theoden died, but he died well. He died as a warrior. He died as a king. If Faramir had just been burned to death, it would have been senseless. There would be no songs sung about it. There would have been no honor in that. It would have just been this just terrible tragedy that happened because Denethor lost his mind. So, and he doesn't know all these details necessarily right now. He doesn't know who's going to die. He just knows in his heart that if he saves Faramir, there are other people that he could have saved that would not, that have died. So this is really interesting. And, in the Council of Tolkien, in my last segment there, I talked greatly about the role of friendship in Tolkien's words and his world. And friendship is really important, obviously. And, obviously Gandalf sees Pippin as a friend. Pippin sees Faramir as a friend. Pippin names his son Faramir. So there's a really strong bond there. There's a really strong bond. You don't just name your son after somebody and, just because you like the name, usually. There's usually some sort of strong connection there. So the fact that there is later a Faramir Took kind of shows you that they did form an important bond. So let's continue here. Then, having made up his mind, he acted swiftly, and catching up Pippin, and setting him before him, he turned Shadowfax with a word. Up the climbing streets of Minas Tirith they clattered, while the noise of war rose behind them. Everywhere men were rising from their despair and dread, seizing their weapons, crying one to another, "Rohan has come!" Captains were shouting, companies were mustering, many already were marching down the gate. They met the prince, Imrahil, and he called to them, "Whither now, Mithrandir? The Rohirrim are fighting on the fields of Gondor. We must gather all the strength that we can find." You will need every man and more, said Gandalf. Make all haste, I will come when I can, but I have an errand to the Lord Denethor that will not wait. Take command in the Lord's absence. So, I love this part. I won't talk too long about this, but I love that line because Gandalf is proving Denethor wrong one last time. Denethor has many times accused Gandalf of wanting to take over Minas Tirith, wanting to take over the whole of Gondor, wanting to take over all of Middle-earth. And that he believes that Gandalf will essentially become the ruler of Gondor with Aragorn as his puppet. And here is an instance where Gandalf does not do that, even though he has the opportunity to start ordering everybody around and telling everybody what to do. He did it in the movie, by the way, which was a mistake. He did it in the movie. Gandalf started basically being in charge of the city until Aragorn got there. But here we have Imrahil. Imrahil is 100% in charge. He is definitely the guy at this point because he's a prince of Gondor. He's not a prince of Minas Tirith. He's a prince of Dol Amroth, but he's still the highest-ranking nobleman in the city because Denethor is out of his mind, has basically abandoned his responsibilities. Faramir is unconscious. He cannot take charge because he's not, he's not healthy right now. So there's that. They passed on, and as they climbed and drew near the citadel, they felt the wind blowing in their faces, and they caught the glimmer of morning far away, a light growing in the southern sky. But it brought little hope to them, not knowing what evil lay before them, fearing to come too late. Darkness is passing, said Gandalf, but it still lies heavy on the city. At the gate of the citadel they found no guard. Then Merregond is gone, said Pippin more hopefully. They turned away and hastened along the road to the closed door. It stood wide open, and the porter lay before it. He was slain, and his key had been taken. Work of the enemy, said Gandalf. Such deeds he loves. Friend at war with friend. Loyalty divided in confusion of hearts. Now he dismounted and bade Shadowfax return to his stable. Oh, my friend, he said, you and I should have ridden to the fields long ago, but other matters delay me. Yet come swiftly if I call. They passed the door and walked on down the steep winding road. Light was growing, and the tall columns and carven figures beside the way went slowly by like grey ghosts. Suddenly the silence was broken, and they heard below them cries and the ringing of swords. Such sounds had not been heard in the hallowed places since the building of the city. At last they came to Rathdynan, and hastened towards the house of the stewards, looming in the twilight under its great dome. Stay! Stay! Cried Gandalf, springing forward to the stone stair before the door. Stay this madness! For there were the servants of Denethor with swords and torches in their hands, but alone in the porch upon the topmost step stood Beregond, clad in the black and silver of the guard, and he held the door against them. 2 of them had already fallen to his sword, staining the hollows with their blood, and the others cursed him, calling him outlaw and traitor to his master. Even as Gandalf and Pippin ran forward, they heard from within the house of the dead the voice of Denethor crying, Haste! Haste! Do as I have bidden! Slay me this renegade, or must I do so myself? Thereupon the door, which Beregond held shut with his left hand, was wrenched open, and there behind him stood the lord of the city, tall and fell. A light like flame was in his eyes, and he held a drawn sword. But Gandalf sprang up the steps, and the men fell back from him, and covered their eyes, for his coming was like the incoming of a white light into a dark place. And he came with great anger. He lifted up his hand, and in the very stroke the sword of Denethor flew up, and left his grasp, and fell behind him in the shadows of the house. And Denethor stepped backward before Gandalf as one amazed. What is this, my lord? Said the wizard. The houses of the dead are no places for the living. And why do men fight here in the hollows when there is war enough before the gate? Or has our enemy come even to Rathdynan? Since when has the Lord of Gondor been answerable to thee? Said Denethor. Or may I not command my own servants? You may, said Gandalf. But others may contest your will when it is turned to madness and evil. Where is your son Faramir? He lies within, said Denethor, burning, already burning. They have set a fire in his flesh, but soon all shall be burned. The west is fallen. It shall all go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended. Ash! Ash and smoke blown away on the wind. Then Gandalf, seeing the madness that was on him, feared that he had already done some evil deed, and he thrust forward with Beregond and Pippin behind him, while Denethor gave back until he stood beside the table within. But there they found Faramir still dreaming in his fever, lying upon the table. Wood was piled under it and high all about it, and all was drenched with oil, even the garments of Faramir and the coverlets. But as yet no fire had been set to the fuel. Then Gandalf revealed the strength that lay hid in him, even as the light of his power was hidden under his grey mantle. He leaped up on to the bundles, and raising the sick man lightly, he sprang down again, and bore him toward the door. But as he did so, Faramir moaned and called on his father in his dream. Denethor started as one waking from a trance, and the flame died in his eyes, and he wept, and he said, "Do not take my son from me. He calls for me." "He calls," said Gandalf. "But you cannot come to him yet, for he must seek healing on the threshold of death, and maybe find it not. Whereas your part is to go out to the battle of your city, where maybe death awaits you. This you know in your heart." "He will not wake again," said Denethor. "Battle is vain. Why should we wish to live longer? And should we not go to death side by side? Authority is not given to you, Steward of Gondor, to order the hour of your death," answered Gandalf. "And only the heathen kings under the domination of the Dark Power did this, slaying themselves in pride and despair, murdering their kin to ease their own death." Then passing through the door, he took Faramir from the deadly house, and laid him on the bier on which he had been brought, and which had now been set in the porch. Denethor followed him and stood trembling, looking with longing on the face of his son, and for a moment, while all was silent and still, watching the Lord in his throes, he wavered. "Come," said Gandalf, "we are needed. There is much you can yet do." Would I agree that one of Denethor's biggest flaws is not believing in divine intervention? No, I don't think so. I think his greatest flaw is he is overly confident in the power of his own will. He has believed himself to be more powerful than he is, more steadfast than he is, more sturdy than he is, more resolute than he is. And for the most part, it's not like he's completely delusional, because he is all of those things. But he does not recognize his own limits, and thus he has basically opened his heart to Sauron. And when I say that, I don't mean that he has become evil, but that he has allowed an evil being to manipulate him, to flood him with images of despair. And he held on for a really long time, He held on for a really long time. But we also have to remember that Denethor, as a person, is the result of a lot of different tragedies. And it actually started with the death of his wife. His wife, Finduilas, died pretty young. And that really messed him up. He never really came back from that. He always had these weird ideas about Gandalf. He has some even weirder ideas about Thorngil. Turns out to be Aragorn. It's not that he doesn't believe in divine intervention, but I think that Sauron has convinced him that everything is at an end. And if we think of Sauron's own personality and why he's doing what he's doing, why he started up in the Second Age, because if you stop to think about it, Sauron has had every opportunity to stop the nonsense. He was there when Iluvatar gave his speech before the world was created about the inevitable futility of evil. He saw Morgoth fall. He saw the reality of Iluvatar's words in the result of the War of Wrath. And what did he do? He surrendered. He abjured his evil deeds, and he begged for pardon. But he didn't do it the right way. He didn't go all the way. He was unwilling to seek out repentance in the proper channels. And eventually, he came to believe that the Valar have abandoned Middle-earth and that it's basically all up to him to save Middle-earth from chaos. And of course, this starts him on his path to evil again. So, essentially, what I'm getting at here is that Sauron really does believe that the Valar don't have a vested interest in Middle-earth. And he's been disproven a few times. The fact that Gandalf's even here at all kind of proves that they have an interest in it. But look at how he messed with Saruman. Saruman went completely off of his mission, completely off it, while still believing that he was doing his mission, that he was doing the right thing. And Sauron still thinks well, at least he thought he was doing the right thing in the past. Now, not so sure. Maybe he knows that he's doing the wrong thing. Maybe he doesn't care. But either way, if we think about it, Sauron no longer believes in divine intervention. And that is really, really dumb of him. Because he took the Akallabeth to the face. The single most devastating thing ever to happen in the history of the world. The major divine intervention happened directly to Sauron. He was at the epicenter of it. And and he was laughing. He was laughing. Yeah, Sauron played a huge part, because here's the thing. Sauron showed him through the Palantir the ships coming up the Anduin. He doesn't know that Aragorn's on those ships. He thinks they're from Umbar. That he thinks Rohan's not coming because the guy he sent to ask Rohan to come didn't make it back. Died. Right? Why is it so important to die in battle? Surely that has more impact on the people if they ruled until old age. There's nothing wrong with ruling until old age. I mean, you think about it, the first king of Numenor, Elros Tar-Minnetar, ruled until he was 500 years old. So it's not that you don't want to live, but what I was getting at earlier is that Theoden was in a spot previously. You got to think of the history of the character. Theoden was in a spot where he really thought it's all over. He's too old. He's senile. He's weak. Wormtongue convinced him a lot of this, coaching from Saruman. And here comes Gandalf proving that that's all nonsense. He's strong. He's a good king. He's powerful. And Theoden is such a good king that he rides in front of his men instead of behind them or hiding in a castle or a tower. So what I was getting at is that Theoden's death has meaning, whereas if Faramir had died, it wouldn't have had any meaning. It would have been senseless, and I think that's why Gandalf made the choice that he made. Wouldn't that be kind of like denying the existence of your family? You know what, Born Joker? Not only are you right, but I know somebody who denies the existence, well, I used to know somebody who denies the existence of his family. People are complicated, and they do things that you would think no person would do under any circumstances, and there you have it. People turn out very different than you might expect. People make choices that you would never expect them to make. So, well, and Sauron knows better than anybody, right? Sauron knows better than anybody that Iluvatar could intervene. Here's the thing. And I'm going to give you a little bit, I'm going to pierce the veil a little and give you a little bit of a look into the sick, twisted mind of Sauron. Because as far as he's concerned, the Akallabeth was something that happened to Numenor. It was God wiping out his enemy. And now he has become upset that Iluvatar, God, didn't go far enough, didn't wipe them all out. There's still some left in Middle-earth. And, Elendil comes and kills him, and And now there's this Aragorn guy he's got to worry about. He hasn't destroyed his enemy. So, like he's a twisted guy, Sauron. There's a lot wrong with him. And like I said, you could try to get in his head a little bit, and it's a dark place to be. I mean, like Melkor, Morgoth, he heard it right from God himself. You're not going to win. Nothing you do is going to even come close to ruining the beauty of what I'm about to create. As a matter of fact, the harder you try to ruin the beauty of my creation, the more beauty you're going to add to it. Hail Tevildo! What's up, Wayne? Tevildo and his house of cats. And Melkor sat there hearing this and still went through with it. So what I'm getting at is that people will deny all sorts of things that are obvious. They will hear things and then pretend they didn't. So there you go. What if Mordor just fell into the sea this time? That would be a bit more direct, right? That would be a lot more direct, but unfortunately, here's the thing, though. He'd still survive, and it would still be a terrible thing that would happen because there are a lot of people in Mordor that are not with Sauron. They're his slaves. They're his captives. They are being forced to work the farms and the fields in the southern parts of Mordor. Aragorn took care of them. But the thing is that sort of thing is so destructive. And what the Valar are trying to do here with sending Gandalf, sending Glorfindel, they're trying to intervene with the least amount of violence possible. And the only thing that's really ever going to stop Sauron is destroying the One Ring. Destroying the One Ring. So, also, I should mention, like, right now, in Mordor, that's where Frodo is. That's where Sam is. So I'm just saying, yes, it would be sort of nice if God pointed his finger down at Sauron and said, "You stop it now," and then just like stripped him of his powers and his abilities and everything, or maybe plucked him out of the world to be put into an eternal timeout. But then that wouldn't be a very good story, would it? That wouldn't be a very good story, would it? Remember, it's a fantasy story. And we talked about this a little while ago, the emphasis on fantasy being not real, but also the emphasis on story being a tale that is told, because what we have here is a tale where Sauron is undone by the least of his enemies. Does destroying the ring kill him because he stored his power in it? It doesn't kill him, no. Because he's an angel, he can't really die. But what it does is because there's so much of his power in it, and that power is now gone for good, he becomes so weak that he can't actually do anything. So it's actually like kind of a fate worse than death, because now he's, what happens is he's stuck, and he sees the world in a state that he doesn't appreciate, and he can't do anything about it. He's just forced to watch. There was a commenter once on Quora who once used a very modern gaming term to refer to Sauron's fate, is that he was shunted into spectator mode. And I thought, well, that's pretty apt, Shunted into spectator mode, forced to watch his side lose and not being able to really do anything about it. Yeah, diminished is the exact word that Gandalf used, actually. He can only act as a cat pushing objects on a shelf. I mean, he started as a cat. Sauron, before Sauron, there was Tevildo, the Lord of Cats. Tolkien was weird about cats. He didn't like cats. He had a very strange relationship with them, and he had very strange thoughts about cats. He put The original Sauron was Tevildo, Melkor's pet cat. Obviously, he changed his mind about that. But that's why Wayne always comes in here talking about Tevildo or Tevildo's House of Cats. Let's continue here. And suddenly Denethor laughed. He stood up tall and proud again, and stepping swiftly back to the table, he lifted from it the pillow on which his head had lain. Then coming to the doorway, he drew aside the covering, and lo, he had between his hands a palantir. And as he held it up, it seemed to those that looked on that globe began to glow with an inner flame, so that the lean face of the Lord was lit as with a red fire, and it seemed cut out of hard stone, sharp with black shadows, noble, proud, and terrible. His eyes glittered. "Pride and despair!" he cried. "Didst thou think the eyes of the White Tower were blind? Nay, I have seen more than thou knowest, grey fool, for thy hope is but ignorance. Go then and labour in healing. Go forth and fight. Vanity. For a little space you may triumph on the field, for a day, but against the power that now arises there is no victory. To this city only the first finger of its hand has yet been stretched. All the east is moving. And even now the wind of thy hope cheats thee, and wafts up Anduin a fleet with black sails. The west is fallen. It is time for all to depart who would not be slaves." "Such counsels will make the enemy's victory certain indeed," said Gandalf. "Hope on, then," laughed Denethor. "Do I not know thee, Mithrandir? Thy hope is to rule in my stead, to stand behind every throne, north, south, or west. I have read thy mind and its policies. Do I not know that you commanded this halfling here to keep silence? That you brought him hither to be a spy within my very chamber? And yet in our speech together I have learned the names and purpose of all thy companions. So, with the left hand thou wouldst use me for a little while as a shield against Mordor, and with the right bring up this ranger of the north to supplant me? But I say to thee, Gandalf Mithrandir, I will not be thy tool. I am the steward of the house of Anarion. I will not step down to the dotted chamberlain of an upstart. Even were his claim proof to me, still he comes but from the line of Isildur. I will not bow to such a one, last of a ragged house long bereft of lordship and dignity." "What then would you have?" said Gandalf. "If your will could have its way." "I would have things as they were in the days of my life," answered Denethor, "and in the days of my long-fathers before me, to be lord of this city in peace, and leave my chair to a son after me who would be his own master and no wizard's pupil. But if doom denies this to me, then I will have naught, neither life diminished, nor love halved, nor honor abated." "To me it would seem that a steward who faithfully surrenders his charge is diminished in love or in honor," said Gandalf, "and that the last you should not rob your son of his chance while his death is still in doubt." At those words Denethor's eyes flamed again, and taking the stone under his arm, he drew a knife and strode towards the bier. But Baragon sprang forward and set himself before Faramir. "So!" cried Denethor. "Thou hadst already stolen half my son's love. Now thou stealest the hearts of my knights also, so that they rob me wholly of my son at the last. For in this at least thou shalt not defy my will to rule at my own end. Come hither," he cried to his servants. "Come, if you are not all recreant." Then two of them ran up the steps to him. Swiftly he snatched a torch from the hand of one and sprang back into the house. Before Gandalf could hinder him, he thrust the brand amid the fuel, and at once it crackled and roared into flame. Then Denethor leaped upon the table, and standing there, wreathed in fire and smoke, he took up the staff of his stewardship that lay at his feet and broke it on his knee. Casting the pieces into the blaze, he bowed and laid himself on the table, clasping the palantir with both hands upon his breast. And it was said that ever after, if any man looked upon that stone, unless he had great strength of will to turn it to other purpose, he saw only two aged hands withering in flame. Gandalf, in grief and horror, turned his face away and closed the door. For a while he stood in thought, silent upon the threshold, while those outside heard the greedy roaring of the fire within. And then Denethor gave a great cry, and afterwards spoke no more, nor was ever again seen by mortal men. "So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion," said Gandalf. Then he turned to Baragon and to the Lord's servants that stood there aghast. "And so passes also the day of Gondor that you have known. For good or evil they are ended. Ill deeds have been done here. But let now all enmity that lies between you be put away, for it was contrived by the enemy, and works his will. You have been caught in a net of warring duties that you did not weave. But think, you servants of the Lord, blind in your obedience, that but for the treason of Beregond, Faramir, captain of the White Tower, would now also be burned. Bear away from this unhappy place your comrades who have fallen, and we will bear Faramir, steward of Gondor, to a place where he can sleep in peace, or die if that be his doom. Then Gandalf and Beregond, taking up the bier, bore it away towards the houses of healing, while behind them walked Pippin with downcast head. But the servants of the Lord stood gazing, as stricken men, at the house of the dead. And even as Gandalf came to the end of Rathdinen, there was a great noise. Looking back, they saw the dome of the house crack, and smokes issue forth. And with a rush and rumble of stone, it fell in a flurry of fire, but still unabated the flames danced and flickered among the ruins. Then in terror the servants fled and followed Gandalf. He was definitely a dog person, Mogul. 100% he was a dog person. He wrote a story called Roverandom, which was a dog having several adventures, and there was sort of this, there was a cat, and the story of the cat was kind of like the cat had a bad attitude. Huan is an example of a character in the Silmarillion that's a dog. That was a really good character, and Tevildo was sort of like the opposite. Like, it was usually dog good, cat evil sort of thing. Let's see. Let me just catch up on here. What do you think Sauron is now? Have we seen him unknowingly in a ghost video on YouTube? Hey, you never know, right? Maybe he's in like Paranormal Activity Part 69 or whatever. Maybe only cats can see him after the ring was destroyed, and they cannot enact his evil plans. Hey, maybe that's the most he can do, is he can get the cat to knock your glass of water off the table, and then he's sitting there cackling, Since the ring made the wearer invisible by destroying it, could have released his power of illusion into the world. Well, it's not really a power of the power of the ring is not the power of illusion, it's the power of domination. The thing is, the reason that it turns people invisible is you have to remember it was not made for anybody to wear except for Sauron. Sauron's a spirit. He's an angel. So what happens when you wear the ring is that you're drawn into the Wraith world, which is a spiritual realm, and that most people don't have the ability to see spirits or anything that resides in the spiritual world. So that's why they can't see you. You're not fully invisible. It was especially mentioned in The Hobbit, actually, that when Bilbo wore the ring, if he was in a very well-lit area, he could be faintly seen, like a shadow almost. So what I'm getting at is the invisibility is not the point of the ring. The point of the ring is domination over others. Yeah, I mean, it depends on like how the rules work in the world, right? And there is that chance that you take and just having the ring destroyed, that maybe that the power within the ring will just go right back to Sauron, or whatever, especially since it has to happen pretty close to him. But what's interesting is that he's in rapport with that power. Not having the ring physically doesn't actually make him weaker. Only destroying it wound up making him weaker. But even if destroying the ring didn't work the way that it did, even if it didn't weaken him, it's still a really good idea to destroy it for two reasons. The first is that Sauron would never again get to use it to dominate others. And the other is that no one else could ever try to use it. No Sarumans, no Denethors, no Boromirs trying to think, I could use this thing. I could do that, So, yeah. You look at it like instead of destroying one enemy, you've created thousands. Well, thankfully, it's not how it works. I mean, Gandalf kind of knows, because he's who he is. He's an angel. He's an equal of Sauron in a lot of ways. Maybe, perhaps not in might, but in a lot of ways, he is equal or greater than Sauron. So he sort of knows how the world works a lot better than anybody else does. I mean, and even then, he doesn't know, he believes. And that's what makes Gandalf such an interesting character, because he's fueled by faith. He's completely fueled by faith. He trusts his gut. He always goes with his intuition. It doesn't have 100% success rate, but has a really good success rate. You know, if it was real life, actually Tolkien told us how it would happen in real life. Tolkien actually told us how it would go down in real life. I find that exact passage. Here it is. The ring would have been seized and used against Sauron. He would not have been annihilated but enslaved, and Barad-dûr would not have been destroyed but occupied. Saruman, failing to get possession of the ring, would, in the confusion and treacheries of the time, have found in Mordor the missing links in his own researches into ring lore, and before long he would have made a great ring of his own in which to challenge the self-styled ruler of Middle-earth. In that conflict, both sides would have held hobbits in hatred and contempt. They would not have survived even as slaves. There's a little bit of a view into how it would have worked if the Lord of the Rings was based on reality instead of fantasy. Hey, Deb, how's it going? Oh, you're late to... Well, it's interesting. You might be late to the party. However, I've had to pause and answer questions and read and talk about stuff so often that I've not gotten very far at all. So we're still on the Pyre of Denethor, which is a very short bit, but there you have it. Let's continue here, though. At length they came back to the steward's door, and Baragon looked with grief at the porter. "This deed I shall ever rue," he said. "But a madness of haste was on me, and he would not listen, but drew sword against me." Then, taking the key that he had wrested from the slain man, he closed the door and locked it. "This should now be given to the Lord Faramir," he said. "The Prince of Dol Amroth is in command in the absence of the Lord," said Gandalf. "But since he is not here, I must take this on myself. I bid you keep the key and guard it until the city is set in order again." So once again, Gandalf making an executive decision, but acknowledging that, well, really Imrahil should be in charge of this, but he's not here right now, so I'm going to do what I believe he would have me do. So once again, Gandalf proving Denethor completely wrong for, the umpteenth time. There you go. He's not trying to take over. Now at last they passed into the high circles of the city, and in the light of morning they went their way towards the houses of healing. And these were fair houses set apart for the care of those who were grievously sick. But now they were prepared for the tending of men hurt in battle or dying. They stood not far from the citadel gate in the sixth circle, nigh to its southward wall, and about them was a garden and a green sward with trees, the only such place in the city. There dwelt the last few women that had been permitted to remain in Minas Tirith, since they were skilled in healing or in the service of the healers. But even as Gandalf and his companions came carrying the bier to the main doors of the houses, they heard a great cry that went up from the field before the gate, and rising shrill and piercing into the sky passed and died away on the wind. So terrible was the cry that for a moment all stood still, and yet when it had passed, suddenly their hearts were lifted up in such a hope as they had not known since the darkness came out of the east. And it seemed to them that the light grew clear and the sun broke through the clouds. Now, who in the chat can tell me, before I reveal it, I'm going to read that part again. Who can check and tell me what happened here? I'm going to read that part again. "And they heard a great cry that went up from the field before the gate, and rising shrill and piercing into the sky passed and died away on the wind. So terrible was the cry that for a moment all stood still, and yet when it had passed, suddenly their hearts were lifted in such a hope as they had not known since the darkness days came out of the east, and it seemed to them that the light grew clear and the sun broke through the clouds." What happened there? So keep the timeline in mind, and keep in mind that we sort of had to rewind a bit to get to the point with Gandalf and Pippin at the beginning of this chapter. Gandalf goes, riding up to all the circles of the city to the top. He has his whole tete-a-tete with Denethor. Denethor dies. They're carrying Faramir and a few other wounded people to the houses of the healing, essentially the hospital of Minas Tirith. And then all of a sudden they hear this cry. What happened? The moment the ring was destroyed. No, not quite yet. Although there is a moment where several characters in this exact spot witness that happening. Okay? So you're not like so far off. It's just that hasn't happened yet. But there are characters in this exact spot in the city that are going to witness that. Success by Mary Noah. Yes, the Witch King just died. That's big. The Witch King just died. That's what happened. But Gandalf's face was grave and sad, and bidding Beregond and Pippin to take Faramir into the houses of healing, he went up to the walls nearby, and there, like a figure carven in white, he stood in the new sun and looked out, and he beheld with the sight that was given to him all that had befallen. And when Éomer rode out from the forefront of his battle, and stood beside those who lay upon the field, he sighed, and he cast his cloak about him again, and went from the walls. And Beregond and Pippin found him standing in thought before the door of the houses when they came out. So Gandalf just looked out, he saw Theoden had died. And he's feeling poorly about it because he feels like it's his fault. He made a choice. He knew that if he saved Faramir, there were going to be others that died. It turned out to be Theoden, and it's going to weigh on him. Of course, if he had not chosen to save Faramir and he saved Theoden instead, that would have weighed on him just as much, if not more. So Gandalf is sort of in a bad position no matter what he did. He was going to feel badly about it. They looked at him, and for a while he was silent. At last he spoke. "My friends," he said, "and all you people of the city and of the western lands, things of great sorrow and renown have come to pass. Shall we weep or be glad? Beyond hope the captain of our foes has been destroyed, and you have heard the echo of his last despair. But he is not gone without woe and bitter loss, and that I might have averted but for the madness of Denethor. So long as the reach of our enemy become, alas. But now I perceive how his will was able to enter into the very heart of the city." Now this is big because Gandalf is, like I said, he feels badly about what happened, but he's recognizing a very important aspect. It's Sauron's fault. Sauron was the one who drove Denethor crazy. Sauron was the one who caused all this. It's not Gandalf's fault, it's Sauron's fault, and he's saying this is the work of the enemy to turn us against each other, to cause these little things to happen that make us doubt each other and make us look at each other with suspicion. So he's forgiving himself, essentially. Yeah. Well, it's fun that you said that, though, because there's a moment in... What chapter is it? Hold on, I'll tell you. I believe it's the Field of Cormallen, chapter 4 of book 6. There's a moment where the ring is destroyed, and you get, like... It goes to Minas Tirith, and Faramir and Éowyn get to watch Sauron's destruction, you know? So, yeah. So there you go. I just began. Well, this is. I mean, I'm on book 5 of 6 here, so of the Lord of the Rings. At least we're in the Pyre of Denethor. So, but yeah, there's a whole playlist if you want to watch from the beginning. I'm glad you're here though. But yeah, the ring being destroyed, we do get differing perspectives on that. We of course we get Frodo's perspective, we get Gandalf's perspective, and we get Faramir's perspective, which is actually my favorite one, because it's all about Faramir and Éowyn falling in love and having this great moment where they hold hands and watch Sauron get blown away by the wind. All right, let's continue. Though the stewards deemed that it was a secret kept only by themselves, long ago I guess that here in the White Tower, one at least of the 7 seeing stones was preserved. In the days of his wisdom, Denethor would not presume to use it to challenge Sauron, knowing the limits of his own strength, but his wisdom failed. And I fear that as the peril of his realm grew, he looked in the stone and was deceived, far too often, I guess, since Boromir departed. He was too great to be subdued to the will of the Dark Power. He saw nonetheless only those things which that power permitted him to see. The knowledge which he obtained was doubtless often of service to him, Yet the vision of the great might of Mordor that was shown to him fed the despair of his heart until it overthrew his mind. Now I understand what this is Pippin. Now I understand what seems so strange to me, said Pippin, shuddering at the memories as he spoke. The Lord went away from the room where Faramir lay, and it was only when he returned that I first thought he was changed, old and broken. It was in the very hour that Faramir brought to the tower that many of us saw a strange light in the topmost chamber, said Beregond. But we had seen that light before, and it was long been rumoured in the city that the Lord would at times wrestle in thought with his enemy. Alas, that I have guessed rightly, said Gandalf. Thus the will of Sauron entered into Minas Tirith, and thus I have been delayed here. And here I shall still be forced to remain, for if I soon have other charges, not Faramir only. Now I must go down to meet those who come. I have seen a sight upon the field that is very grievous to my heart, and greater sorrow may yet come to pass. Come with me, Pippin. But you, Beregond, shall return to the citadel, and tell the chief of the guard here what has befallen. It will be his duty, I fear, to withdraw you from the guard. But say to him that, if I may give him counsel, you should be sent to the houses of the healing to be guard and servant of your captain, and to be at his side when he awakes, if that shall ever be again. For by you was he saved from the fire. Go now, I shall return soon. With that he turned away, and went with Pippin down to the lower of city. And even as they hastened on their way, the wind brought a grey rain, and all the fires sank, and there rose a great smoke before them. That's the end of that chapter. I just want to point out, like, from the perspective of Pippin, he must be pretty tired. He's going up and down the city. And he's a little guy, you know? He's a little guy, so. And hey there, Louise, how's it going? All right, let me get a swig of water here, and then we'll do the next chapter. You only watch the movies. Is that the scene where they're on horseback and they're being chased through the no, did you watch the extended version? Because there's sort of a version of the scene in the movie, but it's like when the Witch King comes and, you know, he breaks Gandalf's staff, which was completely the wrong way to do that. So that's the sort of scene that was in the film. Now we're going to move on to chapter 8 of book 5, The Houses of Healing, which like I said this earlier, this is, in my opinion, this is one of the most funny chapters. It's pretty lighthearted compared to everything that happened before it and everything that happens after it. Sort of a last gasp of humor before it gets really dark. So we're gonna dive into this. A mist was in Merry's eyes of tears and weariness when they drew near the ruined gate of Minas Tirith. He gave little heed to the wreck and slaughter that lay about all. Fire and smoke and stench was in the air, for many engines had been burned or cast into the fire pits, and many of the slain also, while here and there lay many carcasses of great Southron monsters, half burned or broken by stone cast or shot through the eyes by the valiant archers of Morthond. The flying rain had ceased for a time, and the sun gleamed up above, but all the lower city was still wrapped in a smouldering reek. Already men were labouring to clear a way through the jetsam of battle, and now out from the gate came some bearing litters. Gently they laid Éowyn upon soft pillows, but the king's body they covered with a great cloth of gold, and they bore torches about him, and their flames, pale in the sunlight, were fluttered by the wind. So Theoden and Éowyn came into the city of Gondor, and all who saw them bared their heads and bowed, and they passed through the ash and fume of the burned circle, and went on and up along the streets of stone. To Merry the ascent seemed age-long, a meaningless journey in a hateful dream, going on and on to some dim ending that memory cannot seize. Slowly the lights of the torches in front of him flickered and went out, and he was walking in a darkness, and he thought, "This is a tunnel leading to a tomb. There we shall stay forever." But suddenly into his dream there fell a living voice. "Well, Merry! Thank goodness I have found you." He looked up, and the mist before his eyes cleared a little. There was Pippin. They were face to face in a narrow lane, and but for themselves it was empty. He rubbed his eyes. "Where's the king?" he said, "and Éowyn?" Then he stumbled and sat down on a doorstep and began to weep again. "They have gone up to the citadel," said Pippin. "I think you must have fallen asleep on your feet and taken a wrong turning. When we found that you were not with them, Gandalf sent me to look for you, poor old Merry. How glad I am to see you again. But you are worn out, and I won't bother you with any talk. But tell me, are you hurt or wounded? No, said Merry. Well, no, I don't think so, but I can't use my right arm, Pippin, not since I stabbed him, and my sword burned all away like a piece of wood. Pippin's face was anxious. Well, you'd better come with me as quick as you can, he said. I wish I could carry you. You aren't fit to walk any further. They shouldn't have let you walk at all, but you must forgive them. So many dreadful things have happened in the city, Merry, that one poor hobbit coming in from the battle is easily overlooked. It's not always a misfortune being overlooked, said Merry. I was overlooked just now by... No, I can't speak of it. Help me, Pippin. It's all going dark again, and my arm is so cold. Lean on me, Merry lad, said Pippin. Come now, foot by foot. It's not far. By the way, you gotta know that, in a way, Pippin's loving this. He's worried about Merry, but he's loving this in a sense because he's getting to take care of Merry a little bit. And usually it's the other way around. Usually Merry's taking care of him. Merry is the older one. He's the more responsible one. He's sort of out of the four hobbits, usually the voice of reason. And here he's getting to sort of take care of his friend a little bit, his cousin as well. Are you going to bury me? Said Merry. No, indeed, said Pippin, trying to sound cheerful, though his heart was wrung with fear and pity. No, we're going to the houses of healing. They turned out of the lane that ran between tall houses and the outer wall of the fourth circle, and they regained the main street coming up to the citadel. Step by step they went, while Merry swayed and murmured as one in sleep. I'll never get him there, thought Pippin. Is there no one to help me? I can't leave him here. Just then, to his surprise, a boy came running up behind, and as he passed he recognized Burgle, Baragon's son. Hullo, Burgle, he called. Where are you going? Glad to see you again, and still alive. I'm running errands for the healers, said Burgle. I cannot stay. Don't, said Pippin, but tell them up there I have a sick hobbit, a Parian, mind you, come from the battlefield. I don't think he could walk so far. If Mithrandir is there, he'll be glad of the message. Burgle ran on. I'd better wait here, thought Pippin. So he let Merry sink gently down onto the pavement in a patch of sunlight, and then he sat down beside him, laying Merry's head in his lap. He felt his body and limbs gently and took his friend's hand in his own. The right hand felt icy to the touch. It was not long before Gandalf himself came in search of them. He stooped over Merry and caressed his brow, and then lifted him carefully. He should have been born an honor into the city, he said. He has well repaid my trust, for if Elrond had not yielded to me, neither of you would have set out, and then far more grievous would the evils of this day have been. He sighed. And yet here is another charge in my hands, while all the time in the battle hangs in the balance. So, keep in mind the battle's still going. Gandalf is really wanting to join it, but he's having to take care of people. And he's like, wow, man. He's thinking back to, Book 2, the beginning of Book 2, the Council of Elrond. He's thinking back to Elrond did not want Merry and Pippin to go. He wanted to send 2 elves. It probably would have been like, Glorfindel and Eristor or something like that. And Merry and Pippin insisted on going. And there have been times where people thought, well, maybe Elrond had a point. Sam thought that himself. He said, well, Elrond might have had a point about sending Merry and Pippin back to the Shire. When he looked into the Mirror of Galadriel, he saw all the bad things that were happening and were about to happen in the Shire, and he was very upset by it and thought, well, if Merry was there, it wouldn't have happened. But now, Gandalf is like, wow, if I had listened to Elrond, if I had not put my foot into it and said, no, I'm going to say that Merry and Pippin do get to go on this journey, then it would have been terrible. Because first of all, Pippin wouldn't not have been there to tell him to save Faramir, and Merry would not have been there to help kill the Witch King. It would have been so much worse. So everything sort of happens the way that it needs to happen. And Gandalf feels some comfort in that, although he's a little angry that that Merry was overlooked. He should have been carried into the city in honor, just like Theoden, who's dead, and Éowyn, who's nearly dead, were. And I think people see Merry walking around and they think, well, he's fine. He's walking. He's not fine. He's severely wounded here. But they wouldn't understand that because they don't see a scratch on him. He seems fine. But it's the same situation as when Frodo got stabbed It's just that in this case, it was him stabbing the Witch King instead of the Witch King stabbing him, but it's the same sort of result. He really needs quick intervention and quick healing. Let me catch up on chat a bit here. You saw the weirdest Quora post on Tolkien today, the one about the anti-Semitism. What's going on? I'm not sure what you saw. I didn't see that. Where did you see that? Do you happen to have that link handy? And hey there, Spiel Cobb. Or the elf would have been defeated as a bigger target. I mean, possibly whatever elf might not have been there. Maybe they would have went with Frodo. So, I mean, you think about, well, what could have been, how could... That's why I tend to avoid questions where they say, what would have happened if... And the answer is almost always the same. The whole story unravels and Sauron wins. And I just urge you, guys, please, go on Paramount Plus, pull up Star Trek The Next Generation, watch the episode Tapestry. And it's about that sort of thing, about what ifs. What if I did this? What if I did that? What if things were different? And the idea is that every story is a tapestry. Every tapestry has loose threads. And if you start picking at them, the whole thing falls apart. But I don't know what post you saw, Vampy. I was on Quora earlier. I wrote an article about Gandalf and Gollum. But I didn't see what you saw. There's a lot of groups on there. You're reminded of the phrase, you have a lot of power but very little strength. That's a good saying. Good saying. I wonder what you saw. There are such weird things on Quora, though. You got a notification for a Quora post that happened 9 months ago. Well, you know what's funny is there's a guy on Quora named Barry, and he follows... He doesn't follow me on YouTube, but he follows me on Quora, and he leaves me a lot of comments and such, right? And a lot of times he'll ask me, John, why am I just now getting notified of this thing you wrote 3 years ago? And I'm like, 6 months ago. Yeah, either way, it was not recent. Basically, that was probably your digest. And they send things to you that they think you're interested in reading. And it's not all going to be recent. I was actually once spoke with the Quora staff about why my digest is such a mess. And I said, I get the most random things that have nothing to do with my interests. It's all like political slop and, a whole bunch of garbage in there that has nothing to do with my interests. Why are you sending this stuff to me? And the answer that I got at the time was, well, it's difficult to specifically recommend Tolkien-related content to you because you've read it all. And I accepted the answer at the time. But then later on, when I was in a meeting with some of the Quora bigwigs, unfortunately, some of them are no longer with the company, which is to the company's detriment. But I was talking with them about specifically the digest issues, and we were going over a few things. And I said, that was the answer I got, but I thought, well, that still doesn't make sense to me, because why would you... Okay, let's say that like your algorithm has decided that I've seen or read like all the Tolkien stuff. So send me stuff about, I don't know, other fantasy literature, Beowulf, Shakespeare, English literature in general. It's like there's so many things to go other than the political slop that I normally get in my digest that I really don't want to read. So you wonder if you got that Quora post because you just entered Germany. I could ask them if geolocation at all is shared with the site, and if that colors the results of what gets sent to you or not. I don't know if it does or does not. I could ask if you're interested. I could ask right now. I don't know if I'm not going to get an answer right now, but I'll ask right now. I'm gonna go on their Slack and I'm gonna ask them right now, and I'll let you know. Well, you're gonna have to remind me to let you know, but okay, so I just submitted this to the people at Quora through Slack. Does geolocation affect post recommendations on Quora at all? Definitely dog over cat. Okay, so let me type something in the chat here. Let me make sure that I'm typing this on YouTube. Oh, that was Twitch. Hey, Muddleweight. Oh, you're just replying to Moogle. Okay. Sometimes people on YouTube are watching like through a big delay, and I thought maybe that's what was happening. But yeah, I just asked. When I get an answer, yeah, maybe I'll make a YouTube post or something. It's not going to happen right now. They never like answering at 9 p.m. like this. Well, actually, they're in California, so it's a little earlier. But I don't think they're going to answer me right now. Usually, it takes about a day or two for them to get back to me. I wouldn't say that I'm a Quora expert. It's just that I happen to be in contact with a lot of people at Quora. If I was a Quora expert, I would probably be striking if I had any real power, I would be striking the AI out of Quora. It would be a little scouring of the Shire right there in Quora. All right, let's continue here. Next page. So at last Faramir and Eowyn and Meriadoc were laid in beds at the houses of healing, and they were tended well. For though all lore was in those latter days fallen from its fullness of old, the leechcraft of Gondor was still wise and skilled in the healing of wound and hurt, and all such sickness as east of the sea mortal men were subject to, save old age only. For that they had found no cure, and indeed the span of their lives had now waned to little more than that of other men, and those among them who passed the tale of 50 years with vigor were grown few, save in some houses of purer blood. But now their art and knowledge were baffled, for there were many sick of a malady that would not be healed, and they called it the Black Shadow, for it came from the Nazgul. So it's just interesting to note there, 50 is, of course, 100 years. And they're saying it's rare for people to live to be 100 and still be sort of like, hardy and healthy, in good vigor. And what's really cool is it says only in the the very purest Númenórean blood, and we see that with Faramir, because Faramir, I think he lives to be about 120 somewhat years old. He's not of the line of like Aragorn, who's going to be like 219-ish years old when he dies. But Faramir lives really long. All right, let's see, where was I? And those who were stricken with it fell slowly into an ever deeper dream, and then passed to silence in a deadly cold, and so died. And it seemed to the tenders of the sick that on the halfling and on the Lady of Rohan this malady lay heavily. Still at whiles in the morning wore away, they would speak, murmuring in their dreams, and the watchers listened to all they said, hoping perhaps to learn something that would help them to understand their hurts. But soon they began to fall down into the darkness, and as the sun turned west, a grey shadow crept over their faces, but Faramir burned with a fever that would not abate. Gandalf went from one to the other full of care, and he was told all the watchers could hear. And so the day passed, while the great battle outside went on with shifting hopes and strange tidings, and still Gandalf waited and watched and did not go forth, till at last the red sunset filled all the sky, and the light through the windows fell on the grey faces of the sick. Then it seemed to those who stood by in that glow the faces flushed softly, as with health returning, but it was only a mockery of hope. Then an old wife, Ioreth, the eldest of the women who served in that house, looking on the fair face of Faramir, wept. For all the people had loved him, and she said, Alas, if he should die. Would that there were kings in Gondor, as there were once upon a time, they say. For it is said in the old lore, the hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and so the rightful king could ever be known. And Gandalf, who stood by, said, Men may long remember your words, Ioreth, for there is hope in them. Maybe a king has indeed returned to Gondor. Or have you not heard the strange tidings that have come to the city? I have been too busy with this and that to heed all the crying and shouting, she answered. All I hope is that these murdering devils do not come to this house and trouble the sick. Then Gandalf went out in haste, and already the fire in the sky was burning out, and the smouldering hills were fading, while ash-grey evening crept over the fields. Now as the sun went down, Aragorn, Eomer, and Imrahil drew near the city with their captains and knights, and when they came before the gate, Aragorn said, Behold, the sun setting is a great fire. It is a sign of the end and fall of many things, and a change in the tides of the world. But this city and realm has rested in the charge of the stewards for many long years, and I fear that if I enter it unbidden, then doubt and debate may arise, which should not be while this war is fought. I will not enter in nor make any claim, until it be seen whether we or Mordor shall prevail. Men shall pitch my tents upon the field, and here I will await the welcome of the lord of the city. But Eomer said, Already you have raised the banner of the kings, and displayed the tokens of Elendil's house. Will you suffer these to be challenged? No, said Aragorn, but I deem the time unripe, and I have no mind for strife except with our enemy and his servants. And the prince Imrahil said, Your words, lord, are wise. If one who is a kinsman of the Lord Denethor may counsel you in this matter. He is strong-willed and proud, but old, and his mood has been strange since his son was stricken down. Yet I would not have you remain like a beggar at the door. So Imrahil, by the way, is an amazing character that was completely left out of the films. And I love that he says this. He doesn't know Denethor's dead, by the way. So that's real interesting. But he says that he's a kin of Denethor, and a lot of people are like, he's related to Denethor. He's not really related to Denethor. He's essentially Denethor's brother-in-law. His sister was Denethor's wife. And by the way, his daughter winds up marrying Eomer. So, so he had one sister who was the queen of Gondor, and he has a few sisters. And then he has a daughter who becomes the queen of Rohan, while he gets to be the prince of Dol Amroth. So that's, he's sitting pretty there, Imrahil. And he still got left out of the movie. Not a beggar, said Aragorn. Say a captain of the Rangers who are unused to cities and houses of stone. And he commanded that his banner should be furled. And he did off the star of the North Kingdom, and gave it to the keeping of the sons of Elrond. Then the prince Imrahil and Eomer of Rohan left him and passed through the city, and the tumult of the people, and mounted to the citadel, and they came to the hall of the tower seeking the steward. But they found his chair empty, and before the dais lay Theoden, king of the Mark, upon a bed of slate, and 12 torches stood about it, and 12 guards, knights both of Rohan and Gondor. And the hangings of the bed were of green and white, but upon the king was laid a great cloth of gold up to his breast, and upon that his unsheathed sword, and at his feet his shield. The lights of the torches shimmered in his white hair like sun in the spray of a fountain, but his face was fair and young, save that a peace lay upon it beyond the reach of youth, and it seemed that he slept. When they had stood silent for a time beside the king, Imrahil said, Where is the steward? And where also is Mithrandir? And one of the guards answered, The steward of Gondor is in the houses of healing. But Eomer said, Where is the lady Eowyn, my sister? For surely she should be lying beside the king, and in no less honour. Where have they bestowed her? And Imrahil said, But the lady Eowyn was yet living when they bore her hither, did you not know? Then hope unlooked for came so suddenly to Eomer's heart, and with it the bite of care and fear removed, and he said no more, and turned and went swiftly from the hall. And the prince followed him. And when they came forth, the evening had fallen, and many stars were in the sky, and there came Gandalf on foot, and with him one cloaked in grey, and they met before the doors of the houses of the healing. And they greeted Gandalf and said, We seek the steward, and men say that he is in this house. Has any hurt befallen him? And the lady Eowyn, where is she? And Gandalf answered, She lies within, and is not dead, but is near death. But the Lord Faramir was wounded by an evil dart, as you have heard, and he is now the steward, for Denethor has departed, and his house is in ashes. And they were filled with grief and wonder at the tale that he told. But Imrahil said, So victory is shorn of gladness, and it is bitter bought if both Gondor and Rohan are in one day bereft of their lords. Eomer rules the Rohirrim. Who shall rule the city meanwhile? Shall we not send now for the Lord Aragorn? And the cloaked man spoke and said, He is come. And they saw as he stepped into the light of the lantern by the door that it was Aragorn, wrapped in the grey cloak of Lorien above his mail, and bearing no other token than the green stone of Galadriel. I have come because Gandalf begs me to do so, he said. But for the present I am but a captain of the Dunedain of Arnor, and the Lord of Dol Amroth shall rule the city until Faramir awakes. But it is my counsel that Gandalf should rule us all in the days that follow in our dealings with the enemy. And so they agreed upon that. So I love this because, Imrahil is sort of wondering, well, okay, so Rohan, we know who's in charge of that. That's Éomer. Who's in charge here? He should know that he's in charge. If Faramir is unable to do his duties because he's sick, and Denethor's dead, obviously, he should know that he's in charge. But I think that he's so eager for Aragorn to become the king that he's not even thinking that technically he's the one in charge. So then, Aragorn tells him, hey, you're the one that's in charge. But you know what? You're the political leader. We're going to make Gandalf the war leader. And that makes a lot of sense. Oh, Born Joker. Is that sort of like an Avengers reference there? You think everything had to be this way exactly? It was a coping mechanism for Tolkien after the war? No, I just think that I think the coping mechanism we see later, we see the Scouring the Shire as his coping mechanism, I think it's just that he wrote a story that is, in Galadriel's words, the entire thing is on a razor's edge. Or the edge of a knife, as she says. And that one way or the other, you're going to fall off, Isn't Imrahil part elf a little bit? Like very removed. And yes, okay. So Imrahil is descended from this guy named Imrazor, who lived in the early Third Age in Gondor, and he was called the Númenórean. He wasn't like from Númenor because this is the Third Age, but he was such a mariner and such a perfect example of what a man of Númenor is supposed to be. They called him Imrazor the Númenórean. And he wound up marrying a Sylvan elf named Mithrilas. And they had 3 children. And his first son became the first Prince of Dol Amroth. So Imrahil is descended from Imrazor. So he's got a little bit of elf from way back. Right. And what's really interesting is I believe there's a scene, should be coming up, I think in the next chapter, where Legolas meets Imrahil and confirms what everybody thinks. He's like, yeah, this guy's part elf. He's not immortal or anything. Normally, when a man and an elf have children, the children are mortal. There are a few exceptions that happen because of some crazy circumstances from the First Age, but in most cases, immortality has to be from both parents. So Imrahil, he's got a longer lifespan. Just the fact that, like, when we look at visual representations of Imrahil, he usually looks pretty young, even though he's totally in his late 60s at this point. And that's, sort of correct for a man of Gondor of strong Númenórean blood. But also just that little bit of wood elf in him. Mithrilas vanished, actually, which is really crazy. Like, they had 3 children, and then one day she was just gone. I've always believed that she went and sailed to the west, but there you have it. Let's continue along, though. I think Imrahil, if they ever make another like movie version of Lord of the Rings, they need to include Imrahil. They need to include Erkenbrand. They need to include Beregond and Halbarad. These characters that had big moments that were left out. Glorfindel, another big one. Tom Bombadil. Well, he's going to be in the next movie, but not the next one. The one after that. The next one's the Gollum thing, and then we're going to get the Shadow of the Past. But still, if they ever did like straight up just the Lord of the Rings again, I want to see these characters. All right, let's continue here. Then Gandalf said, "Let us not stay at the door, for the time is urgent. Let us enter, for it is only in the coming of Aragorn that any hope remains for the sick that lie in the house." Thus spoke Eorith, wise woman of Gondor, the hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and so shall the rightful king be known. Then Aragorn entered first, and the others followed. And there at the door were 2 guards in the livery of the citadel, one tall, but the other scarce the height of a boy. And when he saw them, he cried aloud in surprise and joy, "Strider, how splendid! Do you know, I guessed it was you in the black ships, but they were all shouting corsairs, and they wouldn't listen to me. How did you do it?" Aragorn laughed and took the hobbit by the hand. "Well met indeed," he said. "But there is no time yet for travellers' tales." But Imrahil said to Éomer, "Is it thus that we speak to our kings? It may be he will wear his crown in some other name." And Aragorn, hearing him, turned and said, "Verily, for in the high tongue mold I am Elisar the Elfstone, and Envinyatar the Renewer." And he lifted from his breast the green stone that lay there. "But Strider shall be the name of my house, if that ever be established. In the high tongue it will not sound so ill, and Telcontar I will be, and all the heirs of my body." So, by the way, Telcontar's literal meaning in Quenya is to pass across, usually referring to going over water. And he's thinking this is the closest there is to Strider, so that's what I'm going to go with there. You'd pay to see a film with just side characters during the events of The Lord of the Rings. Oh, so you want to see like The Lord of the Rings Lower Decks? It's not a bad idea, to be honest with you. Not a bad idea. That would be interesting. Maybe an anthology series about the lesser-known characters. You could even call it something cheeky like Unfinished Tales or something, right? Some kind of anthology series about, these characters that were left out, like Glorfindel and Erkenbrand and Imrahil. Elrond's sons were not even in the movie. Like, they left Elrond's sons out of the movie. How could they do that? Who knows? And with that they passed into the house, and as they went towards the rooms where the sick were tended, Gandalf told of the deeds of Éowyn and Meriadoc. "For," he said, "long have I stood by them, and at first they spoke much in their dreaming before they sank into the deadly darkness. Also it is given to me to see many things far off." Aragorn went first to Faramir, and then to Lady Éowyn, and last to Merry. When he had looked on the faces of the sick and seen their hurts, he sighed. "Here I must put forth all such power and skill as is given to me," he said. "Would that Elrond were here, for he is the eldest of all our race, and has the greater power." And Éomer, seeing that he was both sorrowful and weary, said, "First you must rest, surely, and then at the least eat a little." But Aragorn answered, "Nay, for these three, and most soon for Faramir, time is running out. All speed is needed." Then he called to Eorith, and he said, You have store in this house of the herbs of healing." "Yes, Lord," she answered, "but not enough, I reckon, for all that will need them. But I am sure I do not know where we shall find more, for all things are amiss in these dreadful days, what with fires and burnings, and the lads that run errands so few, and all the roads blocked. Why, it is days out of count since ever a carrier came from Lossarnoch to the market. But we do our best in this house with what we have, and I am sure your lordship will know." "I will judge when I see," said Aragorn. "One thing also is short, time for speech. Have you Athelas?" "I do not know, I am sure, Lord," she answered. "At least not by that name. I will go and ask the Earth Master. He knows all the old names." "It is also called Kingsfoil," said Aragorn. "And maybe you know it by that name, for so the country folk call it in these latter days." "Oh, that," said Eorith. "Well, if your lordship had named it first, I could have told you. No, we have none of it, I am sure. Why, I have never even heard that it had any great virtue, and indeed, I have often said to my sisters that we came across growing in the woods. Kingsfoil, I said, is a strange name, and I wonder why 'tis called so, for if I were a king, I would have plants more bright in my garden. Still, it smells sweet when bruised, does it not? If sweet is the right word. Wholesome, maybe, is nearer." I love this. I said this is a hilarious chapter because Aragorn's like, "Look, there's not time for idle chit-chat. Do you have this plant that I need?" And she's like, "Oh, it smells nice." And she's just going on and just prattling on. And then the doctor comes in and he's the same way. He just yaps. And Aragorn just gets so irritated with it. And I think it's funny. "Wholesome, verily," said Aragorn. "And now, dame, if you love the Lord Faramir, run as quick as your tongue and get me Kingsfoil, if there is a leaf in the city." "And if not," said Gandalf, "I will ride to Lossarnoch with Eorith behind me, and she shall take me to the woods, but not to her sisters, and Shadowfax shall show her the meaning of haste." When Eorith was gone, Aragorn bade the other women to make water hot. Then he took Faramir's hand in his, and laid the other hand upon the sick man's brow. It was drenched with sweat, but Faramir did not move or make any sign, and seemed hardly to breathe. "He is nearly spent," said Aragorn, turning to Gandalf. "But this comes not from the wound. See, that is healing. Had he been smitten by some dart of the Nazgul, as you thought, he would have died that night. This hurt was given by some Southron arrow, I would guess. Who drew it forth? Was it kept?" "I drew it forth," said Imrahil, "and staunched the wound, but I did not keep the arrow, for we had much to do. It was, as I remember, just such a dart as the Southrons use, yet I believe that it came from the shadows above, for else his fever and sickness were not to be understood, since the wound was not deep or vital. How then do you read the matter? Weariness, grief for his father's a wound, and all over the Black Breath," said Aragorn. "He is a man of staunch will, for already he had come closer to the shadow before ever he rode to battle on the outwalls. Slowly the dark must have crept on him, even as he fought and strove to hold his outpost. Would that I had been here sooner." Thereupon the herb-master entered. "Your lordship asked for Kingsfoil, as the rustics name it," he said. "Or Athalas in the noble tongue, or to those who know somewhat of the Valinorian." By the way, if you're wondering about the voice that I give the herb-master, I'm doing a Tolkien impression. "I do so," said Aragorn, "and I care not for what you say now, as say Arianon of Kingsfoil, as long as you have some." "Your pardon, lord," said the man. "I say you're a lord master, not merely a captain of war. But alas, sir, we do not keep this thing in the houses of healing, where only the gravely hurt or sick are tended. For it has no virtue that we know of, save perhaps to sweeten the foul air, or to drive away some passing heaviness. Unless, of course, you give heed to rhymes of old days, which women, such as your good Earl, still repeat without understanding, when the black breath blows, and death shadows grows, and all lights pass. Come, Athalas, life to the dying, in the king's hand lying. It is but doggerel, I fear, garbled in the memory of old wives. Its meaning I leave to your judgment, if indeed it has any, but old folks still use an infusion of the herb headaches." "And in the name of the king, go and find some old man of less lore and more wisdom who keeps some in his house," cried Gandalf. Even Gandalf's like, Shut up. Everybody's talking too much. Let me catch up a little bit here. You want to see a movie where Brethor from the Lord of the Rings RPG video game and his company defeat all the bad guys before Aragorn and his group get there on each stage of the journey. Okay. The Hamlet drama from the perspective of those side characters. Oh, okay, that's interesting. The verbose history of Yorith, indeed. All right, let's continue. Now Aragorn knelt beside Faramir and held a hand upon his brow, and those that watched felt that some great struggle was going on, for Aragorn's face grew grey with weariness, and ever and anon he called the name of Faramir, but each time more faintly to their hearing, as if Aragorn himself was removed from them, and walked afar in some dark vale, calling for one that was lost. And at last Burgle came running in, and he bore 6 leaves in a cloth. "It is Kingsfoil, sir," he said, "but not fresh, I fear. It must have been called 2 weeks ago at the least. I hope it will serve, sir." Then looking at Faramir, he burst into tears. But Aragorn smiled. "It will serve," he said. "The worst is now over. Stay and be comforted." Then taking 2 leaves, he laid them on his hands and breathed on them, and then he crushed them. And straightway a living freshness filled the room, as if the air itself awoke and tingled, sparkling with joy. And then he cast the leaves into the bowls of steaming water that were brought to him, and at once all hearts were lightened, for the fragrance that came to each was like a memory of dewy mornings, of unshadowed sun in some land, which the fair world in spring is itself but a fleeting memory. But Aragorn stood up as one refreshed, and his eyes smiled as he held a bowl before Faramir's dreaming face. "Well now, who would have believed it?" said Eorith to a woman that stood beside her. "The weed is better than I thought. It reminds me of the roses of Imloth Mellowy when I was a lass, and no king could ask for better." Suddenly Faramir stirred, and he opened his eyes, and he looked on Aragorn, who bent over him, and a light of knowledge and love was kindled in his eyes, and he spoke softly. "My lord, you called me. I come. What does the king command?" "Walk no more in the shadows, but awake," said Aragorn. "You are weary. Rest a while and take food, and be ready when I return." "I will, lord," said Faramir. "For who would lie idle when the king has returned?" "Farewell then for a while," said Aragorn. "I must go to others who need me." And he left the chamber with Gandalf and Imrahil, but Beregond and his son remained behind, unable to contain their joy. As he followed Gandalf and shut the door, Pippin heard Ioreth exclaim, "King, did you hear that? What did I say? The hands of a healer, I said." And soon the word had gone out from the house that the king was indeed come among them. And after war he brought healing, and the news ran through the city. But Aragorn came to Eowyn, and he said, "Here there is a grievous hurt, and a heavy blow. The arm that was broken has been tended with due skill, and it will mend in time, if she has the strength to live. It is the shield arm that is maimed, but the chief evil comes through the sword arm, in that there now seems no life, although it is unbroken. Alas, for she was pitted against a foe beyond the strength of a mind or body, and those who will take a weapon to such an enemy must be sterner than steel, if the very shock shall not destroy them. It was an evil doom that set her in this path, for she is a fair maiden, fairest lady of a house of queens, and yet I know not how I should speak of her. When I first looked on her and perceived her unhappiness, it seemed to me that I saw a white flower standing straight and proud, shapely as a lily, and yet knew that it was hard, as if wrought by elf rights out of steel. Or was it, maybe, of a frost that had turned its sap to ice, and so it stood bitter-sweet, still fair to see, but stricken, soon to fall and die, for malady begins far back beyond this day, does it not, Éomer?" "I marvel that you should ask me, lord," he answered, "for I hold you blameless in this matter, as in all else. Yet I know not that Éowyn, my sister, was touched by any frost, until she first looked on you. Care and dread she had, and shared with me in the days of Worm-tongue and the king's bewitchment. And she tended the king in growing fear, but that did not bring her to this pass." "My friend," said Gandalf, "you had horses and deeds of arms in the free fields, but she, born in the body of a maid, had a spirit of courage, at least the match of yours, yet she was doomed to wait upon an old man whom she loved as a father, and watch him falling into a mean, dishonoured dotage, and her part seemed to grow more ignoble than that of the staff he leaned on. Think you that Worm-tongue had poison only for Theoden's ears? Dotard! What is the house of ale but a thatched barn where brigands drink in the reek, and their brats roll on the floor among the dogs? Have you not heard those words before? Saruman spoke them, the teacher of Worm-tongue, though I do not doubt that Worm-tongue at home wrapped their meaning in terms more cunning. My lord, if your sister's love for you, and her will still bent to her duty, had not restrained her lips, you might have heard even such things as these escape them. But who knows what she spoke to the darkness, alone in the bitter watches of the night, when all her life seemed shrinking, and the walls of her bower closing in about her? A hutch to be trammelled some wild thing in?" Then Éomer was silent, and looked on his sister as if pondering anew all the days of their past life together. But Aragorn said, "I saw also what you saw, Éomer. Few are the griefs amid the ill chances of this world of more bitterness and shame for a man's heart than to behold the love of a lady so fair and brave that cannot be returned. Sorrow and pity have followed me ever since I left her desperate in Dunharrow and rode to the paths of the dead, and no fear upon that way was so present as the fear for what might befall her. And yet, Éomer, I say to you that she loves you more truly than me. For you she loves and knows, but in me she loves only a shadow and a thought, a hope of glory and great deeds in lands far from the fields of Rohan." This is interesting because, Éomer is sort of saying, Aragorn, I don't blame you for anything, but I did notice that her mood changed when she started talking to you. And Aragorn's saying, I think you need to think of your sister in a different way. And Gandalf just blurts it out and spells out exactly why Éowyn is the way that she is, why her mood got so dark, why she was sort of the death seeker that she became, at least up until this point. But what's really interesting here is that Éomer is like, wow, I guess I never really thought about it from her perspective. She seemed happy to me, but you're sort of putting it in this very different perspective. And he's saying that, Aragorn's saying to Éomer, I'm just some guy she had a crush on. You're her brother. You know what I mean? You're more important to her than I'll ever be. I have maybe the power to heal her body and to recall her from the dark valley. But to what will she awake? Hope, or forgetfulness, or despair, I do not know. And if to despair, then she will die, unless other healing comes which I cannot bring. Alas, for her deeds have set her among the queens of great renown. Then Aragorn stooped and looked in her face, and it was indeed white as a lily, cold as frost, and hard as graven stone. But he bent and kissed her on the brow, and called her softly, saying, Eowyn, Eomund's daughter, awake, for your enemy has passed away. She did not stir, but now she began again to breathe deeply, so that her breast rose and fell beneath the white linen of the sheet. Once more Aragorn bruised 2 leaves of athelas, and cast them into steaming water, and he laved her brow with it, and her right arm lying cold and nerveless on the coverlet. Then, whether Aragorn had indeed some forgotten power of westerness, or whether it was but his words of the Lady Eowyn that wrought on them, as the sweet influence of the herb stole about the chamber, it seemed to those who stood by that a keen wind blew through the window, and it bore no scent, but was an air wholly fresh and clean and young, as if it had not been breathed by any living thing and came new-made from snowy mountains high beneath a dome of stars, or from the shores of silver far away washed by seas of foam. Awake, Eowyn, Lady of Rohan, said Aragorn again, and he took her right hand in his, and felt it warm with life returning. Awake! The shadow is gone, and all darkness is washed clean. Then he laid her hand in Eomer's and stepped away. Call her, he said, and he passed silently from the chamber. Eowyn, Eowyn, cried Eomer amid his tears. But she opened her eyes and said, Eomer, what joy is this? For they said that you were slain. Nay, but that was only the dark voices in my dream. How long have I been dreaming? Not long, my sister, said Eomer. But think no more on it. I am strangely weary, she said. I must rest a little. But tell me, what of the Lord of the Mark? Alas, do not tell me that was a dream, for I know that it was not. He is dead, as he foresaw. He is dead, said Eomer. But he bade me say farewell to Eowyn, dearer than daughter. He lies now in great honour in the citadel of Gondor. That is grievous, she said. And yet it is good beyond all I dared hope for in the dark days, when it seemed that the house of Eorl was sunk in honour less than any shepherd's cot. And what of the king's esquire, the halfling? Eomer, you shall make him a knight of the Riddermark, for he is valiant. He lies nearby in this house, and I will go... Oh, sorry, this is Gandalf. I thought there was Eomer for a moment. He lies nearby in this house, and I will go to him, said Gandalf. Eomer shall stay here for a while, but do not speak yet of war or woe unless you are made whole again. Great gladness it is to see you wake again to health and hope, so valiant a lady. To health, said Eowyn. It may be so. At least while there is an empty saddle of some fallen rider that I can fill, and there are deeds to do, but to hope, I do not know. Gandalf and Pippin came to Merry's room, and they found Aragorn standing by the bed. Poor old Merry, cried Pippin, and he ran to the bedside, for it seemed to him that his friend looked worse than a grayness was in his face, as if a weight of years of sorrow laid on him, and suddenly a fear seized Pippin that Merry would die. Do not be afraid, said Aragorn. I came in time, and I have called him back. He is weary now and grieved, for he has taken a hurt like the Lady Eowyn, daring to smite that deadly thing. But these evils can be amended, so strong and gay a spirit is in him. His grief he will not forget, but it will not darken his heart. It will teach him wisdom. Then Aragorn laid his hand on Merry's head, and passing his hand gently through the brown curls, he touched the eyelids and called him by name. And when the fragrance of athelas stole through the room like the scent of orchards, and of heather in the sunshine full of bees, suddenly Merry awoke, and he said, I'm hungry. What is the time? So this is like the most Hobbit thing ever. He comes from the brink of death, and hey, breakfast. I'm hungry. You think Faramir had dreams? Maybe that's how he knew him? Oh, Faramir had a lot of dreams. Faramir is a psychic sensitive. He received messages from the Valar in his dreams, the Asanwa Kenta. I mean, absolutely. And it's like what Aragorn said. He called him out of the darkness. Aragorn is a bit of a seer himself as well. But I love that. He wakes up. Where's the food? I'm hungry. That's how you know he's okay, right? That's how you know he's okay. Past supper time now, said Pippin, though I dare say I could bring you something if they will let me. They will indeed, said Gandalf. And anything else that this rider of Rohan might desire, if it may be found in Minas Tirith, where his name is an honour. Good, said Merry. Then I would like supper first, and after that a pipe. At that his face clouded. No, not a pipe. I don't think I'll smoke again. Why not? Said Pippin. Well, answered Merry slowly, he's dead. It has brought it all back to me. He said he was sorry he never had the chance of talking herb lore with me. Almost the last thing he ever said. I shan't ever be able to smoke again without thinking of him. And that day, Pippin, when he rode up to Isengard and was so polite. Smoke then and think of him, said Aragorn, for he was a gentle heart and a great king that kept his oaths, and he rose out of the shadows to a last fair morning. Through your service to him is brief. It should be a memory, glad and honourable to the end of your days. Merry smiled. Well then, he said, if Strider will provide what is needed, I will smoke and think. I had some of Saruman's best in my pack, but what became of it in the battle, I'm sure I don't know. Master Meriadoc, said Aragorn, if you think that I have passed through the mountains in the realm of Gondor with fire and sword to bring herbs to a careless soldier who throws away his gear, you are mistaken. If your pack has not been found, then you must send for the herb master of this house. And he will tell you that he did not know that the herb you desire had any virtues, but that it is called Westman's weed by the vulgar, and Galenus by the noble, and other names in other tongues more learned. And after adding a few half-forgotten rhymes that he does not understand, he will regretfully inform you that there is none in the house, and he will leave you to reflect on the history of tongues. And so now must I, for I have not slept in such a bed as this since I rode from Dunharrow, nor eaten since the dark before dawn. Merry seized his hand and kissed it. I'm frightfully sorry, he said. Go at once. Ever since that night at Bree we have been a nuisance to you. But it is the way of the people to use light words at such times and say less than they mean. We fear to say too much. It robs us of the right words when a jest is out of place. I know that well, or I would not deal with you in the same way, said Aragorn. May the Shire live forever unwithered. And kissing Merry he went out, and Gandalf went out with him. Pippin remained behind. Was there ever anyone like him, he said. Except Gandalf, of course. I think they must be related. My dear ass, your pack is lying by your bed. You had it on your back when I met you. He saw it all the time, of course. And anyway, I have some stuff of my own. Come on now, long-bottom leaf it is. Fill up while I run out and see about some food. And then let's be easy for a bit. Dear me, we tooks and brandybucks, we can't live long on the heights. I just love that. It's just so funny. Like I said, people get this idea that Tolkien's so serious, the Lord of the Rings is so serious, and then you have this moment where Aragorn's messing with Merry. Merry's like, please, can I have some tobacco? And he's like, look, man, you're laying there in a bed, and I haven't slept in days, and I've been through all these battles and everything, and I saved your life, and you're asking me, you go out and get it yourself, and deal with that doctor. He's really annoying, and he's going to yap your ear off, and talk about languages and everything, which is why I gave the guy the Tolkien voice. But, and then, of course, it was sitting there, and he knew it was sitting there, and he was just having some fun. And I love that Aragorn can have a little bit of fun. I love that. Theoden kept his oaths. Made you think of comparing Aragorn and Theoden to Cirion and Eorl. I mean, I think that's on purpose. Cirion and Eorl, although I guess you could say that Cirion is more like Faramir because he was the steward, but still, I mean, there's definitely parallels that you see in the eternal friendship of Gondor and Rohan, or Gondor and the Otheod, the Horse people of the North, back when they were in the North. Now they're not. I mean, this was a sacred oath on the Stone of Eric at Elendil's grave, And it wasn't made by Theoden or Eomer or any. It was made by Cirion and Eorl. But I think that when you become, King of Rohan, you're taking that oath onto yourself. When you become Steward of Gondor or King of Gondor, you're taking that oath onto yourself. So it is important. We're almost done here. Let's finish up here. But I just love that. I say this is one of the most lighthearted chapters in The Return of the King. There's not a lot of lighthearted stuff in The Return of the King. Aragorn and Gandalf went now to the Warden of the Houses of Healing, and they counseled him that Faramir and Eowyn should remain there and still be tended with care for many days. Lady Eowyn, said Aragorn, will wish soon to rise and depart, but she should not be permitted to do so if you can in any way restrain her until at least 10 days be past. As for Faramir, said Gandalf, he must soon learn that his father is dead. For the full tale of the madness of Denethor should not be told to him until he is quite healed and has duties to do. See that Beregond and the Parian who are present do not speak to him of these things yet. And the other Parian, Meriadoc, who is under my care... And the other Parian, Meriadoc, who is under my care, what of him? Said the warden. It is likely that he will be fit to arise tomorrow for a short while. Oh, see, I gotta look ahead. This is Aragorn. It is likely that he will be fit to arise tomorrow for a short while, said Aragorn. Let him do so if he wishes. He may walk a little in the care of his friends. They are a remarkable race, said the warden, nodding his head. Very rough in the fibre, I deem. As the doors of the houses, many were already gathered to see Aragorn, and they followed after him, and when at last he had supped, men came and prayed that he would heal their kinsmen or their friends whose lives were in peril through hurt or wound, or who lay under the black shadow. And Aragorn arose and went out. And he sent for the sons of Elrond, and together they laboured far into the night, and word went through the city, the king is come indeed again. And they named him Elfstone, because of the green stone that he wore. And so the name which it was foretold at his birth that he should bear was chosen for him by his own people. And when he could labour no more, he cast his cloak about him and slipped out of the city, and went to his tent just ere dawn and slept for a little. And in the morning the banner of Dol Amroth, a white ship like a swan upon blue water, floated from the tower, and men looked up and wondered if the coming of the king had been but a dream. As of course, he does, he wants to become the king very badly. He wants to become the king, but he doesn't. He knows that there are going to be some people in Gondor that are going to be like Denethor. They're going to be loyal to Denethor and his sort of thoughts. They're not exactly going to accept him right at this moment, and that they might view him as sort of an opportunist to come in and just sort of take everything over right at the moment when Gondor is sort of floundering. And that's why what he said earlier was so important. I'm not going to come into the city and claim myself as the king until the war is over. Until we have no one to fight. And that's, of course, what happens. But, of course, he does come into the city, but he's like, I'm coming here as a ranger. I'm coming here as a healer. I'm coming here as one of the Dunedain. I'm coming here as a disciple of Elrond who is here to heal people. And in doing so, he wins the hearts and minds of all the people. And they're like, the king, the king, the king. And then he goes out and he sleeps in a tent. And they're all like, oh, Imrahil's still in charge. Right. Yeah, the prince is in charge of the city, right? Okay, cool. Yeah. But we're going to get the king soon, right? Which is why the coronation doesn't happen until after the ring is destroyed and the fall of Sauron and everything, But what is interesting, though, is that, when he was born, they came up, Gilrain and Arathorn and Elrond, all these people that are his parental figures came up with the name Elisar, and which means Elfstone. And it's interesting because there is a physical Elisar, he's wearing it, and it's actually really difficult to sort of discern whether it's the original Elisar or a copy of the original Elisar. So to give you guys like a very brief history of the Elisar is a green gem, probably a beryl stone, that was made by Celebrimbor sometime during the Second Age, as sort of a love token that he gave to Galadriel, because Celebrimbor was in love with Galadriel. Galadriel was already married, so Celebrimbor, being a gentleman, chose to love her from afar, what would we call courtly love. It's the same thing that Gimli does. Gimli is deeply in love with Galadriel. He knows he's never going to actually be with her, so he practices what is known as courtly love. That's what Celebrimbor did. And part of that is giving gifts. So he gave her the Elisar. And he said, this is going to protect your realm. And it's going to heal people. It's going to do all these wonderful things. And at some point, at some point, she gave the Elisar to her daughter, whose name was Celebrian. And then Celebrian gave it to her daughter, Arwen. And Arwen actually gives it back to her grandmother, Galadriel. And that's one version of the history of this particular stone. However, in that version, it's actually a copy. The original came from the first age. The original Eärendil had. And Eärendil took the Elisar into the West when he went into the West, and then Celebrimbor made a second one. However, there's a different version of this story, one that I personally prefer, where it is the original. And it was not from Celebrimbor. It was Eärendil's original gem, and it was Gandalf that brought it back to Middle-earth. And that Gandalf was the one who gave it to Galadriel and told her, you will give this to the man who will be the king. So that's why I like that, because it has a prophecy in it that gets fulfilled here. Because yes, she gives it to her daughter gives it to her daughter, then that daughter gives it to the grandmother, Galadriel again, but Galadriel does give it to Aragorn. And so that fulfills a prophecy that Gandalf would have had if that was the original stone. Tolkien was unsure whether it was the original stone or the copy that Celebrimbor made. Both versions are in Unfinished Tales, so obviously we're going to talk about that very deeply when we read Unfinished Tales. But right now, there's sort of two versions, and you can choose kind of like which one you like more. I like the one where it's the original stone. I like the one where it came from Gandalf from the West, that Eärendil probably gave it to him. Especially since, Eärendil is, I mean, there's no getting around it. Eärendil is also Arwen's grandfather. So it would be nice for that to happen. So anyway, they came up with the name Elisar for Aragorn basically when he was really little. And now, independent of that, because he has an elf stone on his breast, they start calling him Elisar in the city. So it's like, his kingly name is being put together now. Aragorn II, Elisar Telcontar. Of course, Aragorn being his birth name, given to him by his mother, Gilrain. The second, because he is the second Aragorn in the line of Isildur. Elisar is Elfstone. Telcontar is Strider. So let's just put all our names in there at once. It's sort of like what the dwarves do, where the dwarves who are kings, they have their name, and then they have the number, and then they have the title. Thorin Oakenshield, because he's Thorin. Thorin the Second Oakenshield. Thorin the Third Stonehelm. Dain the Second Ironfoot. Durin the Seventh the Last, and such. Wouldn't Aragorn be like a movie star at that time? Stories of him and such traveling around? Absolutely. The only thing that stops him from being like, like the Tom Cruise or the Chris Hemsworth of his time, where you would see him and you would know immediately who he is that he's been around for a really long time. He ages slowly, and he's used a lot of different names. So some of the really older people in Minas Tirith would recognize him maybe as Thorongil, because the last time he was in Minas Tirith, he was calling himself Thorongil. In Bree, he's Strider, and for the first 20 years of his life, he was Estel. He wasn't even told his real name until he was 20 years old. Can you imagine that? But you know what? I'll give you something better than that, right? It's kind of wild to not know your real name until you're 20. But here's a real crazy thought, right? Imagine this. After this is all said and done, the War of the Ring is over. Elrond is going to sail to the west, and Elrond is going to find out what his real name is. There's a thought, right? He's going to meet his father. He's going to meet his mother. And they're going to call him by a name that he's never heard before. And he's going to be like, so that's my name. Because Elrond, that didn't come from him. That didn't come from his parents, I should say. That came from the kidnappers who raised him. That has to mess with. But I think he knows that his name came from the two men the two elf men who raised him were not his parents. He knows that. He knows who his dad is. He knows who his mother is. He just doesn't remember them because he was really little when they had to flee to the Undying Lands, and he was kidnapped and then raised by kidnappers who were also complete maniacs, you know? So Elrond's got a lot. Elrond's got so much to look forward to. He's going to see his wife again. He's going to meet his parents basically for the first time. He's going to find out what his birth name was, or I should say his birth names, because in Elvish tradition, the father gives a name and the mother gives a different name. Does he even know that his name was changed? Well, yeah, I think he would know, because the names of him and his brother Elrond and Elros were because Maglor and Mathros found the two young boys in a cave behind a waterfall, and those elements Rond and Ros refer to the water and the cave. So it was because they were elves. Eldar, El also means star, because Eldar is the people under the stars. But they were found there, and there was like the sea foam, which is Ros, and there's Rond, which is a vault, like a cave. So Elrond, Elros. I mean, he knows the linguistics. He has the Silmarillion. It just hasn't been translated into the common speech. But, you know, right now, as we're, you know, talking with Aragorn and all these guys in Minas Tirith, Bilbo's in Rivendell translating the thing right now. But Elrond, you know, he reads all those languages. He knows the stories. So he knows about his parents and everything. He would absolutely be able to read the Silmarillion and know where his name come from. And his brother's name, Elros. And I mean, his brother obviously never got to meet his parents, and you know, he died back in the Second Age because he chose to be mortal. But of course, he also took his own name because he was a king and he got to choose his name, so he called himself Tar Miniatur. So, you know, the kings do get to choose their own name, you know, kind of like popes get to choose their name, which is another Catholic sort of connection with the Lord of the Rings. Have you guys ever seen a film that came out a few years ago called Conclave? If you haven't, I highly, highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. What a good movie it was. But it was about the passing of a pope and the choosing of a new one, and all of the drama and the infighting and everything. Yeah. And you know what's funny is that I don't even know if Tolkien ever even gave much thought to that fact. Like, I wonder if Tolkien ever thought, well, his parents would have called him something else. But if he had that thought, he would have told you that he didn't know what the real names were. And let's be real. This is the honest part, right? Elrond is going to be really curious as to what his parents wanted to call him. It would have been two different names. But at that point, he's been Elrond for 6,000 years. So they're going to call him Elrond. You did see that movie. It was a good movie, wasn't it? I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed every moment of it. I was like, this is like The Godfather, but instead of being about the mafia, it's about the Pope. Such a good movie, such good acting, such good performances, great cinematography. I'm a big film buff, in case you can't tell. And me and my friend Alice watched Conclave sometime last year, and we didn't. Neither of us had seen it going in, but we were like, "Wow, this is good! You know, this is really, really good." So we do watch. Me and Alice watch at least one film a week. The last one that we watched was The Hunt for the Wilder People, which was it's interesting because it was in New Zealand, and there was a reference to the Lord of the Rings in it. It was a Taika Waititi movie, and there was a moment where the two main characters are hiding from like the government and the police, and they're hiding in the hollow of a tree while the government agents in black are behind the tree looking for them. And as soon as I saw it, I go, are they doing the Nazgul scene from Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings? And that Peter Jackson put into his movie as well because he saw Ralph Bakshi's film? Yes, with Sam Neill. We watched it because of Sam Neill's passing recently. And we were both big fans of his work, and I had not seen it. So we watched it, and there was that scene, and I'm like, are they doing the... As soon as I saw the tree and the way it was, I'm like, this is the Nazgul scene. And the kid, and I was like, he looks like the kid from Deadpool 2. Turns out I was right. He was the kid from Deadpool 2. He's doing this. He's like... And, Sam Neill's character's like, what? I mean, after a while, he goes, I was trying to tell you, it's like the Lord of the Rings, It was a very good movie, although I didn't like the part where the dog died. I always have a rough time with those sort of things, but but it was in New Zealand, and that New Zealand's such a beautiful country. It's where 6 films and 1 season of a TV show based on the Lord of the Rings were filmed, so it's hard not to associate the countryside of New Zealand with Middle Earth. Although personally, I think you could film Middle Earth in other places. Somebody once asked me on Quora if they ever were able to make proper films based on the Silmarillion. Where would they film it in New Zealand? Or would they film it somewhere else? Where are they going to film Beleriand, essentially? And I said, personally, I think if they ever made films set in Beleriand, they should film in Norway. But that's me. What does Pippin mean? We tooks and brandy bucks, we can't live long on the heights. Is he talking about the elevation? 100% he is. You have to keep in mind that Mary's from Buckland, which is it's just to the east of the Shire, and it's right by the river, so it's sort of low elevation. And Pippin's from Tookborough, so he's saying, they're in Minas Tirith, they're way high up. They're not used to that. There's a moment where the hobbits come to Bree, and this was lost in translation a little bit in the film version, because in the film version, the Peter Jackson film, when they come to Bree, Barliman says we have rooms that are suitable for hobbits, but then you notice that nothing in the room is really scaled to hobbit size. So people wondered, what does that mean? And I explained to people that it's a little better explained in the movie, in the book rather, is that it means that the doors are round, the windows are round, and it's on the first floor. Hobbits don't generally like the heights. They don't like heights. They live generally underground, and if they don't live underground, if they live in houses, they're 1 story. So that's kind of like what's going on there, And Waititi was a collaborator with Flight of the Conchords. Brat was in Lord of the Rings. See, there you go. There's a lot of those kind of connections and such, but anyway, let's go over here. I had a lot of fun. And this has kept my mind off of things. I told you guys I am sort of in the midst of a little bit of a family emergency. Hopefully it's all going to turn out okay. I'll know more tomorrow. But it's a little after 10. It's as normally when I would end. I said there was a chance I might end early, but it turned out we had so much to talk about in those 2 short chapters. And you guys in the chat have been so engaging today that I've enjoyed that greatly. We're going to go over the schedule. So if you're watching me on... Oh, hey, Santa Cruz. Yeah, I just ending just now. If you're watching me... But stick around through the raid since you're on the Twitch side. But if you're watching on Twitch, you guys know I will be live tomorrow afternoon. I will be playing Dragon Quest VII Reimagined on Saturday night. I will be playing Xenoblade Chronicles 3 on Sunday night, more of Deltarune. Monday afternoon, more of Street Fighter 6. Tuesday night, more of Chasm. Hey, sorry you're late, WT. You actually are late this time, but how's it going? Yeah, no, I saw you lurking there. No problem, man, no problem. And then Wednesday afternoon, Power Wash Simulator 2, which I did not get to play yesterday because of the family issues. I did not stream yesterday. And then Thursday night, a week from today, we'll have the List Critics podcast. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, the next stream will be in 2 weeks. On August 6th, it will be the Council of Tolkien. Hey, Maddie. By the way, Matt, you did miss it. Yeah, sorry. But yeah, we're at the very end here. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. That's why I post that reminder, 7:30. But are you a member? I think you're a member, right? You'd be able to watch it, the VOD, before it goes live to everybody. Maddie, did you like the answer? I know you liked the answer that I gave you on Discord about Gandalf and the Balrog. I don't know if you saw the one on Quora or the video yet, but there you have it. It's 4:15 a.m. there. That's why you miss most episodes of these earnings. Well, that's why it's good that there's video on demand. Like I said, next YouTube stream will be 2 weeks from today. It will be with Matt and Sid, and that's going to be obviously a lot of fun. And then the next reading will be in 3 weeks on the 13th. We'll return with more of the Return of the King. On the 20th, we'll return with more of the Two Towers video game. That being said, if you're on YouTube, this stream is going to end, and I will bid you all adieu. If you are watching on Twitch, we are going to do a raid, so let me go ahead and choose a raid target. Who are we gonna send you guys off to? You know what? I'm gonna send you guys off to my friend Syrah, who kind of looks like an elf, so... There you go. She kind of looks like a Tolkien elf a little bit, right? You do have an issue, maybe the whole divine... Oh, you know, I think that you have to think of it in smaller ways. I've written about divine intervention and its role in the Legendarium. You can't deny that it's there, but some people are like, I don't like that. You don't have to like it, but it is there. But anyway, guys, let me go ahead and set this raid up. She just started, so she's going to be playing Skyrim. All right, let's see. What are we gonna raid her with? Some kind of crazy elf pun, I think, right? All right. How about I'm gonna mix a little bit of Silmarillion with a little bit of Skyrim, since she's gonna be playing Skyrim. Okay, for those of you on Twitch, copy that, paste it as we head into Syrah's stream. Like I said, she just started her stream, so she's gonna be playing Skyrim. She kind of looks like an elf, right? So there you go. Anyway, for those of you on YouTube, good night. For those of you on Twitch, copy the raid message. Here we go. Raid didn't work. Okay, I'll hit it as soon as I can.